Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Seats are open and available next to me. I promise I don't bite. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Kaplan. I am very happy to be your new Assistant Executive Officer of the State Allocation Board and Chair of the Implementation Committee. Some of you may know, but just a brief overview of who I am. I am a, do we have an echo? No. We have an echo. Oh, okay. I am a school board member for Natomas Unified and have been a school board member for the last 7 years, but I'm also an attorney, and I worked in the legislature for several years, and all my former bosses were assembly members when I worked for them that are now senators. I worked for Dean Flores, Jenny Oropeza, and Leland Yee. So I'm very happy to be with you. I've got experience with construction litigation, and the good old Natomas Unified has given me many years of experience in building and what to do and not to do. So I definitely look forward to working with all of you and getting things done here at the Implementation Committee. Sorry for the lateness. I was at the School Board Association conference last week, but I handed out Kaplan Rules of Order, and for me it's just the simple kind of how I would like to see the Implementation Committee run. A little bit of decorum. Of course, we don't do Robert's Rules, but I figured nice little the biggest thing is that I would like is let's let staff do their presentation, and then I'll ask the IMP committee members if they have any questions, but let's let staff get through the presentation first before we interrupt them, and then after committee members have questions and have answered them, then we'll allow the audience to come up. And there's a mic over there. And for those for webcast, the thing that I do request is that you state your name clearly and who you represent. And I'm hoping that you can state your nature of your concern or policy position in less than 5 minutes. I know that this is generally a consensus building committee, but I also believe in getting business done and moving forward, and if we can't reach consensus, my philosophy is that I present to the State Allocation Board the different views that everybody has, and then it's up to the board to decide. So I'm not about keeping something here for a year. Let's get in, let's hear what we got, let's state different positions and move on. So with that, if there's any comments before we begin? Yes.
The rules of order. Bill Savage, West Contra Costa Unified School District, representing the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. Sometimes the staff's presentations have multiple parts and make up a whole, and sometimes I'm just suggesting a friendly amendment to let the staff do their thing all the way through. Sometimes there's sections and bite-off chunks that we might want to entertain having questions after those portions.
If it's readily visible that there's an A, B, C, D, I'm quite all right with that. Okay. Staff likes to get in, get out, be succinct. I'm not sure they want to necessarily be in the hot seat for hours. So I'm friendly, but I like to keep order. Yes.
Gary Gibbs, representing the California Building Industry Association. I think it's great. We're kicking off with a formal process here, and I wish you good luck on that. But B, I had a question about what the formality and process of agendizing items for the next meeting, and we're going to bring that up, and I don't know whether we want to discuss that now or later, but I'd like to recommend that.
I think that conversation probably can take place when we're discussing the role of the Implementation Committee, okay. Of when we want to bring up and how we want to agendize things and how things are agendized for the future and what has happened in the past and what you guys would like to see in the future. Okay. So happy to have that discussed in item 6. Any other questions, concerns? Oh, I am an on-time girl, so in between 9:05, lunch is an hour. If you miss it, I'm sorry. We're going to get in, get out, respect everybody's time. We've got a busy day, so happy to get started. So, good morning. How are you guys? Change of scope for school facility projects.
Good morning. My name is Ron Cito with the Office of Public School Construction. I'm a project manager, and also that Joel Ryan is with me from our audit fiscal side, and he'll be presenting also with me. The purpose of this report is to clarify guidelines to avoid a potential material inaccuracy due to a change of scope. There were questions in our last board on how to proceed, in the September board, on how to proceed on what to do with a change of scope. The OPC has identified two major issues. First, this would disadvantage other school districts, such as in projects that are waiting for funding. And second, this may result in a funding advantage. The authority section of our guidelines is that it references related education code sections. On page 2, under our discussion, in the 2005 Advisory Actions newsletter, there was an article about how to proceed on a change of scope, request for school facility program projects. There's a list below that has change of scopes for examples. Also on page 4, there is a chart where you can follow for the next scenarios, A, B, C, D, and E. The OPC has come up with general guidelines on what a district should do on these scenarios. The first scenario is A. Scenario A occurs before the OPSC. The district must obtain an appropriate division of state architect approval of the revisions and may need a revised California Department of Education approval. This is by doing this, and it will be ready for the submittal for the OPSC. So, yeah. Okay. In scenario B, the OPSC can only review the final approval scope of the project that will be constructed. So if the project change occurs at this time, the district will need to resubmit the application for funding with the necessary division of state architect and or California Department of Education approvals to reflect the change of scope. Also, if the district does not follow these steps, it may disadvantage other school districts waiting for apportionment and may result in a potential material inaccuracy. Joel will be talking about scenarios C, D, and E.
For the members, we also have a graphic before you, which is bigger and may help you understand what scenarios we're talking about. Scenario C applies in the window of time between the apportionment and the fund release. This window is usually limited to 18 months. If the scope change occurs in this window, it is recommended that a district notify the OPSC immediately. Also, a district must receive state architect and or Department of Education scope change approvals prior to the fund release. If a district cannot obtain the necessary scope change approvals prior to the time limit on fund release, it must rescind the application and reapply. Otherwise, a district risks a potential material inaccuracy related to the information entered on the fund release authorization, Form SAB 5005. Also in scenario C, any scope changes that decrease the funding amount associated with the final scope must be decreased from the original apportionment accordingly. The district must still provide the OPSC with the proper agency approvals, and the revised item containing the new scope of the project would be presented to the State Allocation Board for an adjustment to the original apportionment. On the other hand, if the changes to the scope increase the scope of a project, the district can opt to rescind the original apportionment to then reapply for the increased funding, or accept the original apportionment as is. If the district chooses to resubmit the application, the classrooms in the project cannot yet be occupied. Again, the district must provide the OPSC with the proper agency approvals. After these approvals are received, staff will review the scope change, determine the effects to the original apportionment, and present the application with scope changes to the State Allocation Board for approval. The next scenario is Scenario D. Scenario D applies to scope changes that occur after the fund release. In this situation, the OPSC must be notified no later than 60 days after the scope change is approved by the district or its board. This will benefit the district and allow the OPSC to assist the district in keeping the project moving forward without the potential for a material inaccuracy. If the project would have received fewer funds due to the scope change, then the district would be required to return the excess funds associated with the change plus interest. The district again must provide the agency approvals, as stated before, And at this point, staff would prepare a board item to request the return of excess funds and seek the approval of the amended application. Again, on the other hand, if the project would have increased the apportionment due to the scope change, then the district can either rescind the original project and resubmit the project for processing once again, or accept the apportionment as is without the additional funds. In either case, again, we need the agency approvals from the state architect and the Department of Education associated with the new scope. And if the district chooses to resubmit the project, again, classrooms in the project cannot yet be occupied. Also, the original project must be rescinded, and the district must return the funds plus interest. The last scenario is Scenario E. Scenario E. Scenario E applies when, after a fund release, a district does not notify the OPSC until 60 days after the school board approved the scope change, or when scope changes occur anytime after the audit begins. If audit staff determines that a school district did not construct the approved project, or the state architect, Department of Education, or state allocation board did not approve the scope change, then staff will recommend that the school district return any funding associated with the unapproved scope change. For example, when a school district does not construct all approved classrooms for which it received funding and does not receive the necessary scope change approvals, staff would recommend that a district return the excess funding associated with the unhoused pupils, including interest, and that the SAB restore the pupil grants to a district's baseline eligibility. Lastly, if staff concludes that a school district received a funding advantage and that it falsely certified any eligibility or funding applications, then staff is required by law to notify the board. And that concludes our presentation.
Yes, I just wanted to get a clarification. When we're talking about changes requiring DSA approval, we are talking about only those that impact the eligibility. Is that correct? Eligibility, funding, or advantage in line for waiting, correct?
I would say that's correct. Okay. We're not looking at things smaller, things that don't need DSA approval necessarily, the smaller scope, time extensions due to rain delays.
The thing that I'm most concerned about are in the bidding process, it is normal to have addenda. Some of those addenda require DSA approval. You may have you may have applied for funding during that time frame, but you may require approval of the DSA for the addenda, but they probably will not have any impact on the funding. There has been a question in the past of what constitutes a full DSA approval, particularly when it comes to starting construction. I just want to make sure that addenda were not included in that, because it's typical that those addenda are not approved by DSA until after the start of construction.
Right. We're looking at the material changes to the project at any point that's a significant deviation from what the board approved, what you applied for when you came in for funding, because that's the bottom line when you get to audit is what did the board approve and what was the final product.
But again, only on those issues that impact the funding.
No, not necessarily.
Then I would object. I would object to this simply because it's standard practice to have addenda, and it's standard practice to have those addenda DSA approved. However, if we have to wait for funding for every single addenda that may not have any impact whatsoever on the number of teaching stations, the amount of funding that you get or your place in line, then projects won't get done. They'll be sitting there for 6 months waiting for the addenda to get approved by DSA before they can apply for funding. And I don't think that that's right.
Juan, the margin.
Really what, we're focusing on is the discussion on page 2, and what we're talking about here is the major, changes in scope, and we have outlined certain things that we would, that we have published before in terms of what would be a change of scope. So Dennis, to answer your question, these are the things that we're mostly concerned about in terms of, if it would be a change in scope. So we've highlighted some things. Those are the ones that we're really concerned about. and whether they would require what type of approval from DSA. Richard can maybe help us here in terms of what kind of change documents would be required. But this is a type of changes that we want to focus on. And if you have one of these, then let's get the appropriate approvals from DSA, and those could be change documents or depending on what they are. Right, Richard? I mean, they may not necessarily require a new set of plan approval. It could just be certain change documents.
Richard Conrad with the DSA. Depending upon, one, the scope of the changes, when the changes are made, if you're making a scope change to plan submitted to DSA, you need to identify what those are clearly so that they can be reviewed in the context of the original plans that were submitted. The approval generally would be a stamped plan, of revised plans stamped by DSA, therefore giving their approval. And the documentation of that would also occur in Tracker, our database system for projects, so the project number and the school associated therewith would have a record that there were changes to documents submitted and they were approved by DSA. That's pretty much the extent of what a change document would be. It would be a document reflecting the change that DSA has approved.
Margie, and then back to Dennis and Bill.
Great, thank you. I'm Margie Brown, California Association of School Business Officials. Sorry for being tardy. It's snowing in Danville, by the way. So I'm on page 2, a change of scope for a project. And I was just wondering if we could get OPSC to go through those, because this is about whether or not the OPSC and the SAB would make a finding of a material inaccuracy due to a change of scope. And so I just want to make sure that I understand and that all my colleagues that do this for a living understand. So if I have an addition of classrooms, which is the first bullet, and I'm not asking for any more money, I don't think there would be a material inaccuracy because there's no funding advantage created. Although you might have an issue with eligibility. I'm building more capacity, and so you might want to come back and get me on eligibility. Adjust, not get me. Adjust my eligibility. Thank you. I'll be. And I understand. So I assume that's what addition is for, to adjust my eligibility. But deletion of classrooms, that does potentially causes a funding advantage. If I delete classrooms, I'm getting too many pupil grants. So is that what OPSC is thinking those two issues are on that? And I think I don't get the addition of MEF facilities, but I do get reduction of MEF facilities. So let's just say I'm going to add, another gym, something like that, and I can do it within the scope, and I'm not asking for any more money because there is no more money. You don't get any more money for a gymnasium or a minimum essential facility because you only get money by creating classrooms. So why would you care if I added a building that was not classroom related?
Staff?
In a previous discussion with DSA, and this kind of goes to like site reconfiguration also, or any addition, you have to remember that an MI, the purpose of this is to avoid an MI at audit, what you need to do beforehand. And what auditors are going to look at is changes to what was approved. Now, DSA has indicated they might have issues with any additions or site reconfigurations, although it won't affect your funding because you didn't request extra classrooms, you're just moving things around. DSA might have issues, say, in terms of fire, life, safety, and access issues, roads, getting to the buildings you place, in which case we don't know would there be a significant impact, to the DSA approvals. They may not affect funding, but the key is you need to get the approvals in place before you come in and come to audit. Why wait till the end of the day to find out if you're going to get MI?
Sure. Okay, so I would suggest that school districts do get DSA approval. We just don't come back and tell OPSE because there's no reason to, because we're not tapping eligibility, we're not asking for more money. So I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about the practice that has gone on. Deletion of MEF area, that's minimum essential facilities. I get the concern that we may have said that we were building all these things and then we couldn't afford to. CDE has concerns about whether or not we're building complete schools. DSA doesn't care if I delete a multipurpose. DSA doesn't, you just put NIC right on the plan. You don't care, but CDE cares. And I don't think OPSC necessarily cares because I don't get grants based upon those minimum essential facilities. But I think the concern there is of CDEs and are we building complete facilities for students. And the reason we've done that in the past is because there wasn't enough money in the grants to build it. You had to stay under the budget, you couldn't go over, and that's why those were cut. So I don't necessarily understand why OPSC is concerned about those. Again, deletion of non-classroom, non-MEF area. Again, if we're going through DSA, CDE doesn't care about DSA cares about it, but I don't know why that would be a material inaccuracy if we don't report that to OPSC because it doesn't affect grants or eligibility. Again, I think it's only a material inaccuracy if I somehow got a funding advantage, took too much money, or I jumped ahead in line. And let me just go through a couple more of these. Permanent to modular. I don't know why OPSC would be concerned about that. We've done that if we come in over and we might take a classroom building and make it modular. As long as we don't go from 2-story to 1-story or any additional bump that we got for maybe building that particular type of permanent construction, that shouldn't be a concern to OPSC.
Margie, just a second. Juan, do you have an answer to that?
Just in general, Margie, for the rest of the committee and the audience, you know, when you talk about, I don't know why OPSC cares, I think what we're focusing on is the approvals by the board in terms of a project, in terms of a set of plans that have to go through DSA and CDE. So the board approves funding based on these approvals. If you have what we've outlined as a potential change of scope to that original approval, that's what we're focusing on. So you had an approval, you had a set of plans that were approved by the board. Now, some of these things we had outlined and you know, back in 2005 that these may constitute a change of scope. So if you have these changes and if you know of them, let us know. And we're not saying that you're not getting the appropriate CDE, DSA plan approvals. Frankly, we don't know what those requirements may be. We're just saying that for any project approved by the board, those approvals have to be in place, right? DSA and CDE. So making these kind of changes of scope, we want to make sure that the appropriate approvals are still being approved by the agency. So it's not that we care. I mean, it's basically what was the board approving, and are you making significant changes to that approval because there's certain requirements that came into place for that funding application, i.e. the DSA and CDE approvals.
Dennis, then William, and then.
I guess I'm not, my issue is not in whether there should be adjustments or not. My issue is in with timing, particularly with the DSA approval. For instance, we're in a very good bidding climate right now, and this doesn't happen right now, but 5 years ago, things like receiving a bid and having to make adjustments because you were way too high, that was pretty much normal. So if you had, like Margie was saying, if you had to go from permanent to modular construction, you may have submitted at that point when you received the bid, you may have already submitted your application and received approval from OPSC. And now we're saying, okay, that kind of a change has to go back through DSA. That's another 2 or 3 months. And you may have to rescind the application and come back for a new application. That whole thing takes time, and you've got a construction contract that is on hold that is going to end up costing the district more money because there's delays while you're waiting for these decisions. I would think that I agree that the approvals have to be made, but I think that if they were made if they were made in such a way that it didn't slow down the construction process, it would be a lot better for the for the school districts and the state, because it's going to end up costing the state more money too. So,
Bill?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind the practice now, and the practice is essentially focused on the Division of State Architect, and that the practice of OPSC is to review these things at audit. And I'm not sure why that has to change. And if we continue to insert state agency reviews in the middle of construction, all it does is delay and cost us more money. So I don't necessarily think this is a great idea to essentially, what I'm hearing is you want another layer of approval in the middle of construction, which I don't think is very helpful for the state of California in terms of cost-effective construction. I mean, I can appreciate that you're trying to you're trying to give districts some guidance about how do you stay out of trouble, basically. I got that part, and I think that many of these things that are here listed, a few of them could have real impacts on your funding and your eligibility. Some of them are so unlikely as to be kind of bizarre. Changing modular to permanent construction, I mean, very unusual in most school construction projects. And so changing the placement of a building on site, I mean, if you move a building 10 feet and there's no change in the cost or no change, I mean, what does that matter? So I can see that addition and deletion of classrooms, that's a big one, okay, that affects your funding eligibility, it affects a few things, probably. And let's make sure we understand why is this going to happen? Because there isn't enough money. The bids come in high. The grants aren't enough to build the project, and there's not local funds available to make up the difference. But I'm really reluctant if the implication of this discussion is that we're inserting a whole other layer of review in construction. This is not where we want to be as a state.
One reply and then Gary.
So going from modular to permanent is because there's not enough money?
I'm sorry. Going from permanent to modular is the standard approach in life.
Okay. And we've had, just as a reminder, Bill, I think it's from the last year, an item that went before the board that for a district that did exactly that. They went from modular to permanent. So just trying to clarify that these things do happen.
Okay.
So it's not as unlikely as you may have stated.
All right.
Gary?
I just wanted to kind of second what Margie was saying. I think her exercise of going through issues that really impact the state funding and limit it to that, I think is invaluable. And I think you're hearing everyone's consistent on that. And the concept of jeopardizing or delaying the process, I don't think that's the intent of OPSC at all during the review process. And I think just reinforcing that, because there are a lot of addendums to bidding, and I don't think anybody wants to derail the process during that phase. To the extent you can clarify that's not the intent, I think that would be good. There's one additional element, though. If you start reconfiguring some of these elements, it could have an impact on the site development costs. And so I think that's one of the nebulous areas that you're probably looking at a little bit. So to the extent that there's a real impact on the costs of state funding, I think we're all supportive. But to go into kind of, just carte blanche evaluating everything might not be helpful.
Mamie?
I think I agree with Margie's summary and what Gary said about if it impacts your funding. I have some concerns that at what point does OPSC become the gatekeeper for DSA and CDE responsibilities? And I think that the code covers what we have to do with each of those entities. And once the board has approved an amount of eligibility to be used for a project, you've approved it with all the site development calculations and so forth, gets back to the whole concept of full and final, and we're out the door. Once again, I can see where Margie said, if you do something, for instance, I whack a whole classroom building out, well, then, I've gotten funding that I did not use for the scope that I had approved by the allocation board. But I do have some concerns that when you get to the end of the project, all of a sudden OPSC is looking at things that were, especially going back, that were fully taken care of and will be taken care of by the district with the other entities. I think the scope of what OPSC is looking at really needs to be what Gary said. Does it affect our funding?
Okay, Juan, then Margie.
We're not trying to be the gatekeepers for CD and DSA, guys. Come on. Really what we're saying is that, we're talking about projects that have to be approved by these agencies. And if you have these kind of scope changes, we think that the law requires that these kind of approvals are approved by DSA and CDE if needed, depending on the changes. We all know that there could be some things that don't have to get approval, but to qualify for state funding, you have to get the approvals from the agencies. We would just want to make sure that they are, these changes are being approved. And the other thing too, and maybe we can, focus on some of the issues that I've been hearing is, and you guys please, give us as much information as you can. Districts know when these changes are taking place. At some point, somebody has to sign off, right? So what we're just saying is that you know, because you have to approve these things, and please correct us if we're wrong. So if you know of these changes, notify us, and we'll help you go through the process. There may or may not be changes that affect funding, but we can help you determine that. And that's what we're trying to do, is establish a guideline. If you have these things, you know that these changes occur because somebody has to sign off. So then work with us, we'll work with you. And we're not saying what needs to be approved by CD and DSA. Each of those agencies will make that determination, and we'll go forward. So that's what we're trying to do, is just create these guidelines so that everybody knows that if you have these changes and you know when you have them, let us know, and let's see if we can, what changes we need to do, if any.
I'll go Margie, Robert, then Dennis.
So OPSC doesn't help us with DSA or CDE. We help ourselves with DSA. We help ourselves with CDE. And we help ourselves with OPSC. I think, Juan, the only time we notify OPSC is if it's got a funding or an eligibility change. And usually that's done at the end of the project at audits, and that's probably going to be wrong. But everything else we do that impacts the project, we go to DSA. Sometimes when we think of it, sometimes when we can't close it out, and we found out no one sent the paperwork back through DSA. But that's when we do it. We go to CDE if we're thinking about it, and if we're not, when CDE, catches us and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that, you need to fix this. But OPSC doesn't help us get DSA approval, at least not in my perspective, or CDE approval. And so I want to make sure that it does feel like OPSC is inserting another layer of approval for things that OPSC has nothing to do with, and that's a concern. I think anything that involves eligibility and funding, I absolutely need to come back to OPSC, and I should come back timely. But anything else doesn't need to come back through OPSC. It just feels like a log jam, and that's just my professional opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, Robert, Dennis, then Gary.
Rob Pierce, representing Suburban Schools, and I would concur with Margie. I don't think it's your intent, and I don't believe that you're trying to add another layer, but it does appear, and we need to know the rules of the game. Districts do, and most of us do know the rules of the game, and if we don't, then unfortunately you may make a mistake. But as Dennis was alluding to, there's a number of strategies that we have to deal with, whether we're pre-bid, during bid, and post-bid. And if we know the rules of the game, we can kind of do those things. And I think I've done things in my current life and my previous life that totally clean how we understood the rules of the game to be. But some of these issues may surface now, and it may look as if we were trying to do something, not so much for a funding advantage, but that we weren't letting OPSC know. So one of the questions is kind of when would these new rules take effect? And, it does seem like another layer in things that we as practitioners are already supposed to know how to do. And so kind of where does it stop? Do you also follow up with fire marshal approval and air quality management board approval and all these other things that we have to do in part of our daily jobs? So one question is kind of when would you apply the rules, especially scenario D and E, or for what types of projects? But in scenario D, you mentioned, and Juan, you were kind of going this route. Let's see. Second to last sentence says the OPSC must be notified no later than 60 days after the change of scope is approved by the district. And so I would ask what you mean by the scope is approved by the district.
Well, that's actually something that we need help from you guys, is what kind of approvals does the district need to have to to get these changes of scope going? Does it have to go to the board? Can somebody sign off? What's typical?
Go ahead, Robert.
Anybody?
I think it may vary, depending on the nature of the scope change, but from district to district, it may vary as well.
I think it would probably, first of all, it has to go to DSA. Any scope change of this size that you're talking about would be approved by DSA, and then if it had a cost impact to the contract and it was a change order of the contract, eventually it must be ratified by the local board. So, yes, there is a ratification at least by the board.
Before it goes to DSA, Bill, is what I'm saying, is the district, how does the district initiate these changes? Who needs to, what kind of approvals need to take place? And again, this is just for our understanding.
Normally, in our district, it probably varies widely. In our district, staff would initiate the changes, have the architect change the drawings, submit them to DSA, get them out of DSA, keep going, and then have the board ratify. It would vary by district, believe me.
But that would the work would be proceeding while all this was going on. You don't stop work while you're writing this up.
Right. No, and all we're trying to find out is if let's use one of these examples. The first bullet. If there's a deletion of classrooms, who needs to? I mean, what kind of approvals? Who makes that call? You know what? Let's take off a wing. Can a district representative do that? Does the board need to do it, or how does that?
That's painful. That's a painful decision.
Well,
okay, so that would be something that the board would want to share the pain of with us.
And I can say this from a school board member perspective, which is right, in every district it's different. But I know if it affects funding, it needs board approval. So deletion or addition, eligibility, it requires board approval. But Robert, are you done with your questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Dennis, then Gary.
I think, again, I would like, well, first of all, I didn't introduce myself before. Dennis Dunstan with Total School Solutions. I'm representing the Council of Educational Facility Planners International. My biggest issue with this is in timing. We can't allow the construction projects to be slowed by another level of approval. And essentially what you're saying is that now whenever we do an RFI or any change directive or anything like that, we have to review that to make sure that there's no impact whatsoever on the state funding. And one of the things, as an example, the site configuration. If, for instance, due to soils conditions, you have to move a building, okay, well that site configuration is probably going to change the sidewalks. It's going to change the accessible path of travel, and that would have to go through among other things associated with that change. That would have to go through DSA, and it might impact funding. But that is something that could very easily be overlooked in the hustle to get this project done, that review and notification. If, on the other hand, it was done like it is now, and in the final accounting of the project, you go through and you say, oh, you moved this building, so there's a $10,000 reduction in the site accessibility cost, I don't have a problem with that. It's just making the changes and doing it so that it would have an impact on the progress of the project and having to wait for approvals at the time.
Gary?
As one of the lucky senior members here who's involved with the original drafting of this, I'll bring up some institutional memory. The whole intent of this program when we drafted it was a grant program. And while maybe people liked it or didn't like it, one of the bigger outcome was to shift everything to local control. So districts could really design whatever they wanted, and then the state's responsibility, we shifted away the liability, and you became a funding operation, not a design operation. And that was the intent of the whole program. And what concerns me here is all of a sudden we're shifting back into an incredible micromanagement at the local level of the design, when the intent was not only to give overall design, but to give flexibility during the bidding process. And so to the extent there is substantial changes in the design that affect the funding, then I absolutely think you guys want to be involved with that, on both sides. But to the extent they're moving their designs around, I think that's good and that's healthy, because the local markets change continually and the demands change. And so for you guys to worry about that just makes no sense. And that was never the intent of the original program. It was to shift this worry out of your hands. So.
Deborah?
Just a couple of questions following Margie's line of thought here. First of all, one, and I agree with Gary, but a question on, for an example, a school district, and like Margie mentioned, we do DSA by ourselves, we go to CDE by ourselves, but let's say I've gotten my plans, we're out, we've gone to bid, and then the contractor comes in and says, okay, I can save you $100,000 in plumbing or some of those costs if you move this building. Now, I don't know why that would require going back to OPFC for approval because it's still within the scope of the project. And I know how busy you folks are, and I can't imagine that if it didn't affect, if the building was still the same, just reconfigured, or the placement was different, why you would want to be involved.
Go ahead.
One of the things, and that may, if you just change the building, and now we're getting really into the weeds here, but Gary mentioned some of this earlier, that there could be some changes in site development costs, utility costs that were granted at the beginning of the funding application process based on where a building was at. If you change it, it could impact it. I'm not saying it will, but it may. So there may be some changes to the funding application in that sense. But it's something that we're trying to identify the changes that will or may affect funding. We're not trying to add a different layer because, and that's what we're trying to get to here is a process that you all have to go through anyway. So when you know these changes are coming, let us know. We'll see if there's going to be any changes in funding, and we'll move forward that way. But again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Again, trying to get with what the district already does anyway. And if we have a clear outline that if you get these kind of changes, it may affect your funding. So you know what? Let me give OPSC a heads up because I'm going to add a wing. I'm going to delete a wing.
Well, I guess my concern would be, as Lisa had said, sometimes for the example that I gave, if the contractor says we can save you $100,000, I don't take that back to my board. However, what concerns me, and it's not in here, is what's going to be your time frame. It doesn't mention that because you're giving us 60 days to notify you, but if you're going to add another layer, there needs to be a time frame for you to get back to the district, like a week, because you don't want to be backlogged.
Juan,
before I get into the other one, what I do want to mention too is that's something that we've always encouraged is for districts to include additive deductive alternates into their contract, to maybe be more flexible. But we don't want to hold up the process. We do know that these things may need to get CDE and DSA approval. So to the extent that we can keep these things moving while we're still notified, let's come up with a process. We don't want to hold up projects, but we do want to make sure that we know if there's going to be certain changes that may affect the funding and that we notify the board because the project that originally was presented and approved by the board has now changed and it may change the funding.
Bill?
Well, and I think you're hitting at the heart of one of our biggest concerns. It feels like this is a new layer of approvals required before the work can proceed. And as long as anything that came out of this was a simple point that what in the best case it would be if you notify OPSC that you're taking out a classroom, then you're automatically getting out of the MI cauldron and the project keeps going and then there's a timeline that you meet. You're not approving this change. Right? I mean, because that's the issue here. If you have to approve the change, then forget it. This doesn't make any sense at all. It's not going to work. If you just need to be notified, and then there's a process that starts in relation to if there's a major funding impact, how do we deal with it? Then I have less heartburn with it than if there's an approval requirement.
There may be, and I'll let staff. In terms of funding, there has to be. If there's changes to the funding application, let's get into another example. Let's say that the plans came in and the district was going to I don't know, build multi-level, okay? A multi-level, two-story. And a certain grant gets awarded because of that. And then you go to single-story. You don't build it. There should be an adjustment, and that we don't do adjustments without going to the board. So the board should be notified, we believe. There might be other cases, guys, too, in the write-up that we're taking it to the board, but basically funding changes, right?
Things that would affect, things that, grants that were given that wouldn't otherwise be given if the change was made prior to the grant being given the first time.
Okay. Robert, Margie, then Dennis.
And Rob Pierce, Suburban Schools. And so to that point, Juan, and Bill was expressing my concerns as well, I'm trying to think about a project, and I guess I would be moving forward on the project. I would have to, but I'm somewhat at risk pending involving OPSC and kind of getting their buy-off on that. So, I mean, it sounds like you're trying to protect us from ourselves in that we don't make an MI or a funding inaccuracy mistake. But I just fear that in doing that, which is a good thing and I appreciate that there's going to be certain things that are going to hold up projects and lead to delays and lead to added costs, and totally not your intent, and I understand that, but it just seems to me, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but a simple statement from OPSC that if you have a scope change, you should include OPSC in that discussion.
Okay. Mark,
Right, but just to cover yourself, it doesn't hurt to call your project manager and say, hey, we're going to make the multi-purpose room 1,000 square feet bigger than the plans show.
Okay. Margie, then Dennis.
Margie Brown with CASBO. I want to make sure everybody here understands it's a hassle to make a change. And I pay a lot of money to a lot of different people to make those changes, so we don't make them arbitrarily. And I see what OPSC is doing. You're looking for excess funds. And also you're looking to see if I built extra classrooms and I didn't charge my eligibility. Those are the two things. So can you give me some examples of, it just really feels like a lot of work, and I don't know how egregious this has been. If all I'm doing is sending you a notice, I added 4 more bathrooms, or I moved the toilet building closer because it's not close enough. We're doing something for special ed, whatever. All right? Or I'm adding a special ed bathroom. Whatever it is I'm doing. If I just notify you and I'm done with it, I agree with Bill Savage that that's a very simple thing to do. But if then we're going to have to go back through a PVT review to see if you gave me too much underground utilities, or if you gave me too much clear and grubbing, it just sounds like you're looking for $1 and it's going to cost us thousands, and that's a concern I have. But I know that there's probably some big players in here that have done some things wrong, but I haven't heard about them. But it's a hassle to make changes once you already have your stamped plans. Nobody wants to make those changes because it delays and it costs money. So I'm just trying to figure out, can you give us some examples? like some big dollar examples? I just like to know. You don't have to name the school districts. I'm sure it's nobody here sitting around the table.
But actually, Margie, I want to move this process along because I'm kind of getting where you guys need to go. So instead of spending all day on this, I want to hear from Dennis, and then let me summarize what I've heard you say. And then after Sean, I'll summarize what I've heard you say, and then figure out how we move forward with this, of another discussion of OPSC reviewing where SAB is on this. Otherwise, we can have this discussion forever, but I'm kind of hearing the same thing from you guys. So I want to make sure that I can summarize, report back to the SAB, and then, move forward on this, because I know this will be another discussion. We're not going to solve this today. So Dennis, Sean, and then maybe I'll add you in, and then no more.
If I recall correctly from the original SB 50, there's a clause in there that's still in the Ed Code that encourages school districts to look for innovative approaches, innovative solutions to school projects. And just one last thing that I would like to say, I think that this policy would discourage the innovation, simply because if you go out to bid and a contractor comes in, as somebody said earlier, somebody comes in with a bid and says, for this same price, I can get you a larger multipurpose room. Now, according to this, it's an increase in the project scope, so I have to rescind my original application and reapply when I need that money to go ahead with the project. So if there is a way to do this process, get the DSA approvals, that's fine. I'm all on board with that. But make adjustments later, perhaps at the audit, with all these changes, to allow districts to be innovative in their approach and not have to reapply and slow the project down. Thank you.
Sean?
Thank you. Sean Atlow, Los Angeles Unified School District. And I agree with the sentiments of everybody up here. Just wanted to say that out loud. I do have some questions about the material inaccuracy part. My understanding is that to have a material inaccuracy, you must have a false certification. And in some of these scenarios, I don't see an opportunity to actually certify anything falsely. Because in some of these scenarios, there aren't any forms being sent back and forth. So can you walk me through the scenarios and tell me where the opportunity for an MI exists if it does, in fact, require a false certification?
You're correct. The false certifications could occur on any eligibility or funding applications. So in this topic, I think that could occur on the application for funding or on the fund release authorization. So in scenario A, it's a little harder because you haven't even submitted at that point. So really in that scenario, we're just giving you a guideline. But by scenario B, you have submitted your application for funding. So it's possible that since one of the certifications is that you have received approvals from these agencies, that if you haven't received the approvals, then and then it turns out that you're disadvantaging other districts by having a funding advantage, then there's a potential for an MI. But, you know, I say that reluctantly because it's a case-by-case thing. So you're right. It is related to false certification.
May I follow? Yeah. So is it correct that if everything was true at the time we submitted a form and we had all of our approvals at that time, then a change is made and we've gotten all of our approvals, there isn't really an MI if we haven't told you about it because the forms we submitted were true and correct at the time. Is that correct?
Right. If the forms that you submitted were correct and there wasn't a false certification, then there would not be an MI.
Okay. Mamie?
Mamie Starr, County Superintendent's Association. I'd just like to make a note, and I don't think we need to discuss it at the moment, but in terms of process, I think we would want to see how does this work in process so things keep moving. Do we need a Form 5075 or whatever it is to get us going? And well, I mean that's how we operate though when we're going through a process. There's a piece of paper that gives us documentation at the beginning, in the middle, and then at the end, which is what we're really looking at, is where are we at the end? And also, I don't think we need to talk about it right now, but how does this whole process then feather into the PIW? And and Lisa, just in terms of procedure, are you going to summarize for the committee at the end of each discussion and then take public comment or take the comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Let me summarize what I've heard from the implementation committee members, take public comment if there needs to be some question and answer, but if anything new changes from what I summarize, feel free always to email me your summary and how you feel, because I will be presenting, the board, the IMP committee report to the SAB based on whatever I heard or you guys said, and summarizing your points of view, and let the board make a decision as we move forward. So let me just briefly say what I heard, and then also give a couple statements of my own. As we're looking at the background, my job is the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board. It's to be a liaison for what the State Allocation Board wants. And as I look at their September 23rd meeting, board members asked how a district can proceed with a change of scope and how it could be handled without resulting in an MI. So, am I correct in stating that's the premise that here at the Implementation Committee we want to start from? Yes? We're okay in that. So that's, as we move forward with OPSC, that's something that's very important to me. Board members did not want this to result in an MI. So what I heard from you guys, and then one of the other things that this ties into is the premise of an audit that we're having, especially in discussion next Monday at our audit committee. What is the premise of an audit, and what exactly is OPSC looking for in an audit, and exactly what is being audited? Is it changing, the site reconfiguration, or is it funding and allocation of eligibility? So we're concerned here, one, not having this affect the timing of the funding as we move forward, but OPSC is looking for the effect in the funding, so i.e. something that would change the funding that could potentially result in an MI. Board members do not like that this feels like a new approval process, but it seems to be that if OPSC in adjusting and amending the guidelines creates a notification process, that the implementation committee members feel that that's probably a better way, so that it's a notification as the project continues forward, but that there's a notification that then OPSC creates a process after the notification. So maybe a mid-year audit instead of waiting to the final audit, that if there's a mid-year, and this is just me, because I know OPSC is looking for, grants and funding. So is there, I'm always looking for that compromise, and this is just a discussion that we can continue at another time. But, I heard more of what's the notification process if this becomes a notification process, and under the premise, that I continue to go back to is how do we do this change of scope without it resulting in an MI? We need to better define what, change of scope is, what it means, so that districts have clear rules of what it means, so that they understand what a change of scope is and can play by the rules. Something that I would need from the implementation committee members, as Margie, you brought up, what is going to be the cost of this? I think it needs to be aware of what is the cost, an added layer of cost. If you feel this is a new process, what's the cost to districts to do this? Notification's one thing, but if it also affects the timing and scope of the project and increases costs for districts, the SAB should be aware of that as they're making their decisions. And so mostly kind of how does this work in real life? If we were to create a notification process and amending the guidelines, what is the definition of a scope? What does it mean to districts? What are the rules in relation to that? And then what's the process once it hits OPSC as we move forward? I'm not going to make you all 100% happy, but is that basically what you were telling me? I'll get to you, Michael. Public comment, state your name, who you represent, please.
The microphone.
Yes.
Tom Duffy for the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. And Madam Chair, I'd like to ask one, are you trying to characterize OPSC now as Ebenezer Scrooge or the Grinch that stole Christmas? I'd like to know, because that's what this feels like.
No.
Either one of them? I think Gary said it very, very well. We constructed this program a long time ago to give districts ample flexibility to build. And we've had this discussion time and time again when we've talked about audits and other things. I think all of you have been very polite about this. I don't like this at all. What this does is to constrain school districts from being able to move forward and build. And I think it's true, your question, Sean, if you're telling us that we have to respond in so many days, then when do you respond and let us know? Because it feels like a gotcha. And Juan, I highly respect you, and I'm not complaining about you at all. It's this whole idea of taking back from districts the authority to move forward with projects. And the idea of an MI, that was Gary Hart legislation a number of years ago, and it wasn't envisioned to be a threat to districts to not make sure every state agent knows what they're doing at the local level. And I agree. If I don't notify DSA about some change, it may be because DSA, I know, doesn't need to know about that, although maybe one of your auditors are going to say, well, you made a change in your lighting system, and maybe it was heavier, maybe it wasn't, but you didn't go through DSA. Well, if my structural engineer says, no, this is fine, then we don't need to do that. So I don't know where this stops. I heard this gentleman say, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So we just blur the lines completely and say, we're going to make it up as we go? I think you need to go back and rethink this completely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Juan?
I just want to point out, guys, that this changes of scope is not a new thing. This is something that we had, published back in 2005. So all we're trying to do is, using the same guidelines that we had back then, trying to create a process that notifies districts, okay, if you have these things, this is how you let us know. Not all districts may be as savvy as most of the people in this room. So if they are thinking about making certain changes to a project, they may not be aware that, hey, you know what, this could jeopardize the funding that was approved by the board. So if you notify us, we may be able to help you. So you know what, if you do this, you may have a reduction, you may not. But again, it's also a means to help districts because they may be contemplating certain changes, but they may not be necessarily aware of how that affects their funding. So the changes of scope, those guidelines have been in place. That's nothing new. We're just trying to create a process, and we're looking for input to help us get there in a manner that works for everybody. That's what we know that we don't want to delay projects. We've heard that. We don't want to create another layer. So how do we get there? I mean, as the chair just summarized, the board asked us to come back and take a look at this thing so we can avoid an MI. We thought that we laid out a process where districts can utilize to notify the appropriate agencies to avoid the MI. There's some questions, there's some concerns. Great. Well, what works? Give us some alternatives. Give us some changes that you think might help us get there.
Okay. Wow.
I'll try to pick it up. There's two issues I'd like to talk about. Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified School District. Thank you. The first one has not been addressed yet, and I'd like to just talk about it for a second, is the idea that if you have something called a scope change after you've submitted your application and before it was approved by the board, you have to, if you make a scope change, you have to rescind your application and start all over again. That in and of itself has potential for major problems with school districts because many times school districts file the application to stop some timelines. For instance, the appraisal values of the site acquisition may be tied up in that application filing. And so if you say take 2 classrooms out of the project or add 2 classrooms, whatever you did, and you made that change and you've got to rescind the application, you're going back to the flexibility issue that Tom was talking about. You're taking away flexibility, and districts will be stuck with staying with an application simply because there are timeline issues of having to rescind. So I would ask that you change that to say that a scope change after the application has been filed may be subject to rescinding and reapplication. I'm not sure what rules you would then go into. I'd like to see it simply changed to say you can amend an application after it's filed as long as it isn't, constitute a whole new application or something like that. I don't know. The second thing I want to talk about is that this is kind of the same thing, but I think there is a major change going on here. A couple of things one has said are really concerning. That this item says that after you have your apportionment, your full and final apportionment that a district is subject to giving some of that money back. And I don't know where the authority for that comes from. I understand the issue, but, you know, you're walking across a pretty harsh line there to say, we're going to review, you know, I don't know how many times that happens, your application, and start taking money back from the apportionment just because there's some scope change. Maybe it's appropriate, maybe it isn't, but I think that issue is a pretty big issue that needs to really be thought out before you make it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Larath, representing Small School District Association. In addition to everything that Lyle just said and some of the comments from Tom, we're the ones who represent the school districts. The question of maybe they don't know all of these particular issues. One of the reasons SB 50 came forward, and thank you, Gary, for the quick history on that, was to ensure that school districts had more flexibility, and one of that process was self-certification. Self-certification and MI are going together in a lot of different ways. What I would request as a consideration as you go forward is, as the chair indicated, that there be more self-certification and notification. There are a lot of scope changes that as long as you notify on the PIW, nobody should really care one way or the other, and you don't have to do a mid-year audit or anything else. There are some that you can notify that do have a funding change, but it's a minimal funding change that can be picked up at the closeout audit and the final audit. So as long as the district notifies, then there's not a particular problem. The big issue appears to be on large dollar amounts where there was an inappropriate eligibility, claiming more grants and then you eliminate a classroom, or you claim a two-story and you don't do a two-story, or some of those activities. That is an issue that has to be addressed, but I do not know of very many cases where that occurs other than the following. A district has a series of plans. They've gone forward with those plans, and then they have less eligibility when they go for funding than they originally anticipated. Historically, under the old lease purchase program, as long as you were at 75%, you received 100% funding. Under the new SB 50 school SFP, unlike the LPP, historically what we've done in those situations is given negative eligibility for the future, rather than having people go back and totally redo all their plans, have the loss and everything else. I would urge you all to look at and think about that type of flexibility, those types of things, where you can avoid, you do the notification of OPSC, there's a process by which you resolve, and you don't become eligible for an MI unless you totally and absolutely refuse to notify when you have knowledge that there has been a significant change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wael El Attar from San Bernardino State Unified School District. I'd just like to mention that there is a distinctive difference between the eligibility and the grant given for modernization projects versus new construction. In modernization projects, there is no really connection between the actual scope. The modernization project is really based on the school, how old the school or the last time it's been modernized, and how many students enrolled in that school, and other variables. So therefore, the eligibility established as such, and any change of scope of work is not really relevant in this case. So I do ask that the modernization projects are actually to be excluded from this discussion. Thank you.
Any other further public comments?
Hi, Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I'm not going to point out some of the comments that have already been made by some of my colleagues and from you guys, but I don't see an ending.
Richard, who do you represent in regards to?
Richard Gonzalez and Associates.
Yes, but who are your clients?
Many.
It's school districts, business.
School district consultants, lobbyists, construction management firms, architects. I get the wide range.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I know who you're representing.
Okay, thank you. And myself.
Concerned citizen.
Yes, absolutely. It's like there's never going to be any point in time in the application process where districts can have reliance on something having been done, and they can move forward knowing there's a reliance on something going on. DSA, CDE approval letters are submitted along with application documents, and the districts rely on those certifications to be able to move forward on their projects. They then go to the bidding process, see that these changes come up, they make these people aware of the changes, and there is a process to get those changes done. But it appears that through this write-up, the OPSC is then saying that we have now potentially an MI, because what we are now seeing with the amended plans, we now not have an approval, and that was a miscertification. We are then said, okay, we may find some things that cost less because of the change in the scope. Example I might have here is instead of 200 linear feet of water line, you now have 175 linear feet of water line. Okay, well, we got a grant for 200 linear feet. Well, it's a full and final apportionment. We can't come back to you when we find out it's 250 feet. We can't get an extra additional apportionment. It seems like it's only a one-way street. We want the money back, but you're not willing to give us anything. Well, that was the premise of the full and final. You make your best shot. You do the best you can. You get an allowance for what you can build. And if you can make some adjustments to it and find a way to save money, that savings is yours to do what you need to do with it for other high-level capital facilities improvements. I feel that by the wording in all of this, there's a wider ranging of authority trying to be given to OPSC with defining what is and isn't a material inaccuracy and taking more and more of it away from the state allocation board. The areas that I think that should only be of concern, as I heard from these folks as well, is are you having enough classrooms in your project to justify the number of grants you asked for? That was never part of the original program, but we've adopted that as the years have come along. We've come into the idea as well, if you agreed to build a minimum essential facility and it's in the plans, you should be going forward with it. But wait a minute, there's been a lot of cases here where the money doesn't stretch quite so far. We work with CDE and say, look, we'll take care of it as part of our master plan. There's no flexibility for that in here. I'd like to see a lot more of these kinds of the issues being the focus of what the state allocation board can address, and not all this minutia of okay, we got a portable instead of a permanent now. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other public comment? Brief, Tom.
One quick question. Tom Duffy for Cash again. One, when we had our audit meeting back in May when you met with Cash and Margie was part of that, we had talked about scope change at that time. Are you implementing any of this at this time? Is any of this really happening at OPSC?
Are we doing that, Michael? I'm not sure if we... I don't know if we've seen any...
Referring to addressing scope changes?
You were at that meeting as well. We talked about scope change relative to audit.
This is the same thing we've been doing since pre-2005 when we did the advisory actions. This has been an ongoing process, how we address scope changes. You know, anytime a district finds an issue or thinks there may be or not even sure, they should contact us, give us a call. Hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and we can look at it. But you shouldn't wait till audit.
Well, quick clarification though. But we're changing and clarifying the guidelines. But these guidelines are not in place as currently drafted and written. Yes? No?
I don't.
No, not these. Not
like this. No, but the process is the same. A district notifies us. They have an issue. We take a look at it. We review it. If it needs to go to the board for an approval, then we do that.
Okay.
But Michael, if I may, Madam Chair, Michael, I just heard you say that you've been doing this for the last decade.
This is the same way we would have handled any scope change issue. If we see a two-story building change to one story, we see classrooms deleted, not built as they are approved, we do our research with the district first before presenting.
If there is something that has to do with direct funding, like as Dave was talking about, eliminating a classroom, we've always believed that. If you don't build the second story, you don't get the second story allowance. But the other things that you're talking about here, if I can't build the permanent and I have to go to a modular because I can get it because it's less expensive, There's no funding advantage there. Why would you even consider that? And my question really is, are you implementing these things now? And have you? And it sounds like you're saying that you are.
I don't know the last time we actually found a permit to modular on an audit end. We've had scope changes requests from school districts that have proposed that, which I believe the board approved, and the same district went back the other direction too, or made the request. The key is to come with us beforehand so that we don't have to find out at audit and determine at that point what happened and why and was everything in place it should have been. Because it doesn't necessarily result in just the funding advantage and a change to the grant amounts. You know, there's still the line jumping issue too. What did you come in for? There's the certifications you make on your form, you know, construction commensurate, all the certifications you make on the 5004. So when you submit that application, you're coming in for an approval project and the board approves that. If it changes the audits, we're going to look at why. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to push an MI. We have to find out why. We have to do our research and look at everything involved with the project. What was certified, what got built, and why. So to define the scope change and what the net effect is, it's going to be very difficult to do. That's why we say we handle on case by case. We have to look at all the circumstances surrounding the project.
And the listing that's on this page with the bullets under discussion, there's about, 9 of them. Is that exhaustive, or is that only representative?
And it says on there, but not limited to those.
Well, I see the bottom one, yeah, which affect funding. So who decides whether it affects funding? Is it Margie who is building the project, or is it OPSC? It sounds like it's OPSC.
OPSC should review the circumstances, and if we think it results in a funding change, we'd present an item to the board.
Okay.
Okay. As we move forward in this comment, what I want to hopefully hear from our IMP committee members, I think what I'm hearing is a lot of concern. So how do we take which I'm a bit concerned because it feels like we're blurring the lines of audit and change of scope, which change of scope does go into audit, but when does one start and one begin? Is an audit the entire process, or is it an end? And so that's a bigger discussion that I don't want to get into, but that's what it feels like I'm hearing now, is there's no clear lines, which is concerning. I think what I'm hearing from the implementation committee members is that's what it feels like, there's a blurring in those lines. But as we move forward, and I take comments now, I would like to have feedback directly to OPSC staff as to what you would like to see. So we've seen this and they presented, so you don't like this. Okay, well, how do we resolve that? We need to move forward, and so you know, I think OPSC staff, you know, believe me, OPSC and SAB is not going to take everything you say, but what is your recommendation? You're not voting on anything, but if there's to be anything to change, and you guys are the ones implementing this, you know, the premise is notification to the state allocation board, OPSC, as it goes through. You know, I think this needs further clarification by the state allocation board so that OPSC can then implement and draft guidelines to exactly what the state allocation board is desiring. Because if I'm reading this correctly, it's, and I'm a little concerned because it doesn't feel like we're implementing what the SAB wanted, of clarifying guidelines of change of scope without it resulting in an MI. And so I want to stick with that premise as we move forward. How do we define the guidelines of change of scope? And based on that premise, can you now give recommendations to OPSC staff of what you think that would look like? Yeah. And as we move forward. Okay, I had Michael has been waiting since a long time. Then I had Deborah. Then I had Dennis. Then I had Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael O'Neill, California Department of Education, and I can't speak directly to the MI issue, but I just want to just add a little bit of clarification to the CDE process. When we approve a final plan, we certify that that project meets certain regulations for educational appropriateness and safety regulations. We also state in there that the district certified that that project is fully covered in a CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act process. But we also have in place a process and a form for districts to request supersedure approvals after we've issued that final approval. And it truly is up to the LAA to determine when to submit that to us, but we are interested in Obviously, if there's a change in the master plan or the project capacity, and that could be from adding or taking away classrooms. But we're also interested in the size, the number, the type, and location of buildings, because it could affect the educational appropriateness or other issues on the site. And we do issue supersedure approval letters. We've done that for a number of years, so the process is in place. We don't have we don't go out and monitor what is actually built by the districts from what we approve. We just don't have the staff to do that. But the process in place now for supersedures, it works, and we do issue those. Just want to clarify. Thank you.
Okay. Deborah?
I just had a question on what Tom was saying. If apparently there was a meeting, and Margie, you were there, that affected MIs as it relates to the change of scope, and you have guidelines, if I understood you correctly, and said you were following and have been following those for a number of years, is that correct?
Audits will make recommendations based on what was approved and what was actually built, looking at all the circumstances involved. The guidelines are the statute and the regulations. If we find the district was not in compliance with those, then yes, we'd bring an item forward based on whatever criteria was violated.
Okay.
Just to quickly clarify, so Michael, you're talking about when you do the audits, which now as audits currently stand, kind of at the end of the process, that's what you're talking about in regards to change of scope and guidelines, what may result in an MI.
Right.
But what we're discussing now is a change of scope which could result in an MI before that final audit process, and so it's kind of a mid-year MI. Correct? That's as I'm reading
Correct.
The guidelines, that's what I hear the implementation
The
committee
intent
members.
is to avoid finding an MI at audit because you violated some statute or criteria. So the intent of this item is why wait till audit? If you find something earlier, notify us earlier, and we can get approval from the board earlier in the process.
Okay, so maybe it should, and this is me speaking off the cuff, as we're looking at this, because the SAB said without resulting in an MI, so maybe there needs to be a notification process for districts that doesn't result in an MI at that time, but at the audit and the final review, if it's a falsely certifying and a false in regards to notification, that in the end could result in an MI because you've clarified the guidelines in regards to change of scope. So am I wrong in kind of that's what you're trying to get at? In reality, you're not trying to get an MI gotcha right now, but it's a notification which then, as we go through an audit, comes up because because that's what's being presented, and as you just said, that's not what the SAB wants. You know, they want a clarification in the change of scope that does not result in an MI. And it sounds like right now we're creating one of a change of scope mid-process that creates an MI.
Yep.
Madam Chair, I think you know what we wanted to do is, and what I thought that the board asked us to do is, what can districts do to avoid an MI for change of scope?
Okay.
So here's a process that districts need to go through so that they won't get an MI, and avoid one. You know, before we've always had. I don't want to say always, but since 2005, we had the change of scope guidelines. So now it's further clarification that if you have these changes of scope, notify us. We'll notify the board, and it hopefully won't result in an MI. You know, every case is going to be different, just like staff has presented. But what do you do so that you don't get to the audit and possibly receive an MI?
There was Dennis, then Gary, and then Robert.
I don't know. Maybe I'm unusual. Maybe it's because of my Midwest farm boy upbringing, whatever. But I have a tendency to believe that the vast majority of the school districts out there are honest people. You know, that 99.9% of them are honest people. And the problem with throwing all of this MI threat out there is it makes everybody paranoid, and it distracts from doing the job at hand, which is building schools. I think the best way to go about this is to tell school districts that if a change comes up, notify OPSC as quickly as possible without the threat of MI, and then at the audit, at the final audit, then all of the paperwork and all the funding adjustments are made at that time. I think that's going to cover most of it. But with all the threats of MI, you're making everybody paranoid so that they spend a lot more time going through things that they shouldn't have to go through, reviewing things that they shouldn't have to review. I mean, if you have a school district like Bill's school district, he's got a tremendous building program down there. And if we make it so that he has to add staff to review every little change that comes along to see whether there's any kind of possibility of a funding differential on that, it's going to slow him down. And that's the way it is with a lot of school districts. I say we just tell the school districts, okay, if a change comes about during construction, notify OPSC as quickly as possible, and then during the audit process, we'll work out all the funding. And if there has to be adjustments to the apportionment at that time, that's fine. But that's not an MI.
Quickly before we go to Gary, then Robert. So what am I hearing you say is create that notification process to OPSC, but maybe is there a brief, if it's a major change, if we design a major scope which could have a major funding, then that creates a new trigger process within OPSC, because if I'm understanding correctly, the premise is really about funding and application. And I think the MI process is already, correct me if I'm wrong, Juan, already set up that if a district falsely certified to get their application process ahead of time, that's already going to be an MI, no matter what.
Don't keep throwing out the threat of MIs along the way. You're just making people paranoid. And when they don't have to be paranoid.
I would kind of like the second what Dennis is saying. In a sense, what I'm hearing and certainly support is that if there's a change in scope of the project that significantly and negatively impacts state funding, then you need to bring it up immediately. And other than that, I don't know how many schools you guys have built, but there's hundreds of changes in scope of every project that's built. It's a moving target. It is changing all the time. I mean, it's normal. And, oh, by the way, we want that normal process and normal flexibility. I mean, as Dennis said, if there's a soils problem that you identify, you don't want to sit there and keep the same DSA plans, but you don't necessarily want to shut everything down because the cost of shutting down that project can be astronomical. So you just got to keep making these changes on site constantly. I don't think you want to get into that. I think, I don't know, it just is, I think even what Tom said, it's just getting way, we're micromanaging a project when you really, and I support this 100%, want to identify the abuses and the problems immediately in terms of if, hey, someone pulls out 300 classrooms or $10 million in a project and totally changes the scope where they're using your money, the state money, for something they shouldn't be, then you need to go after that right away. And that's where I think we should drill our resources. Forget everything else. I mean, just at the end you can capture the details of what issues and reconciliation. And actually, Richard brought up another big point, which the CBIA was 100% behind. And that is that in the initial intent of SB 50, we wanted districts to go in and to design more cost-effective schools. And we certainly didn't want the state to come in and micromanage those designs so that they can't do it. And we also advocated, and there's statutes in there that says if there is cost savings, the districts get to keep that money. And that's statutorily in there. So we're all of a sudden convoluting a process which, could create a lot more problems and a lot more costs than not. So I would just keep it simple to big issues that affect the state.
Okay, as we're, Robert, as we're wrapping this up, this will come up again in our February meeting. So in the meantime, as I want to move along with this meeting, is now your responsibility is to get to Juan, I, and staff your changes, what you would like to see, your input, whether that gets back in the discussion, but I think and then, further discussion with SAB as to their direction and what they would like to see needs to happen as we move forward, and what does it mean to clarify these guidelines at the direction of what the SAB was looking for. So, Robert?
So just real quickly, one thing that probably been a little remiss in saying is there's already a scope change process. We as districts know what scope change processes need to happen depending on what the scope change is. If the underlying premise is that the board wanted to ensure, which I believe to be the case, that districts can move forward with scope changes without an MI, that's what I understood the issue to be. If that's the issue, my biggest concern is we just put together a process that does nothing but increase opportunities for MIs. again, scope change processes are already in place, and we as practitioners know what to do to get there from here. If our intent is to inform the ignorant, it's never going to happen. If our intent is to keep bad people from being bad people, it's never going to happen. The districts who are, as Gary said or someone said, we're all honest folks by and large. So I don't know how many MIs we've had to date, but it just seems like we've just, and I don't think it was the intent of staff at all, but unknowingly just introduced a few more opportunities for MIs.
Okay, well, we've got our work cut out for us. Thank you, everyone. Now we're going to move on, and thank you, staff, for your work and your presentation. Appreciate it. And so now we're moving on to item 3 on the agenda, the alternative education loading standards and funding. Oh, you know what? It is 10:30. Can we do like a 5-minute? Yes, Lau, as you've raised your hand so diligently.
Lisa, you said we're going to review this again in February?
Yes.
Why not January?
We don't have an implementation committee meeting in January.
Why not?
Our next one's February. From
Why?
now until June, as before I got appointed, it was set up for every other month.
Who set that up?
I have no idea. The AEO and OPSC.
No, we had this conversation the last meeting. It was decided that there wouldn't be any change to the schedules of this meeting until it was further discussed. Now you're just saying that somebody's made this decision?
Well, as Lyle, as you know, I just stepped into this, so I'm getting.
I'm aware of that, Lisa. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Well, then I think at item 6 we can have that discussion again of our next meetings. However, I will say this, probably too soon to have a January meeting, as we are holidays. So maybe, after February, if the committee direction is to have every month after that, then we can have that. But
we had January meetings every year for how many years? Since 1986.
Appreciate that, Lyle. I do things differently.
I have no problem with that, except, Madam Chair, I don't think you have the authority to simply change the meeting schedules like that. Pardon me for being
Lyle, just on a technical note, if you're not on the microphone, people on the webcast can't hear you.
Thank you.
All right. Item 3, we're talking about the alternative education loading standards and funding. Staff?
Good morning, committee members and stakeholders. Dia Johnson, Project Manager for Office of Public School Construction. We're here today to provide a status update on the issues related to Continuation High, Community Day, County to Community, and County Community Day schools, commonly known as alternative education schools. In 1999, due to AB 695, required a study be conducted by the Department of General Services to review the method of funding the construction and modernization of school facilities for alternative education schools, and authorize the State Allocation Board to revise the per classroom loading standards. The results of the study were released in March 2003 by DGS and distributed by the OPSC to all SAB members and school districts in a report entitled The Review of the Funding Methods for Continuation High, Community Day, and County Community Schools. The recommendation given in the report was that the SAB considered changing the classroom loading standard for alternative education schools to 18 pupils per classroom. In this report, it also stated that the DGS legal counsel opined that to modify the funding for these schools will require further legislation, and that is based upon the education codes in the authority section of this item. In March 2004, the SAB approved regulations to change the alternative education new school allowance, and the SAB directed the OPSC to report on the effects of the new grant 1 year after the regulations took effect. As directed by the SAB, staff returned in February 2006 to update the SAB on this matter. The report indicated there were an insufficient number of projects funded under the new regulations to determine the impacts of the change to the alternative education new school allowance. The SAB provided the OPSC additional time to gather information. The OPSC presented an additional status update in August of 2006 to the SAB on the alternative education new school allowance and loading standards. Due to the continued lack of project data, the OPSC still could not evaluate the impact of the regulation and could not present a loading standard recommendation because it would require information from the discussion of funding. It was decided that the OPSC would resume the alternative education funding and loading standards discussions at the implementation committee when the OPSC had sufficient funding data to review and staff resources were available. Recently, staff found 25 alternative education school projects that have been closed out between 2000 and 2008. Of those, 17 projects were standalone projects and 8 projects were additions to existing sites. Although AB 695 provided the SAB authority to adjust the alternative education loading standards, no adjustment has been made. The OPSC would need further data for analysis to develop a recommendation to the SAB. Also, the OPSC lacks expertise on stipulating loading standards. Therefore, any change in the loading standard for alternative education schools would lead to a change in the amount of funding per classroom. At this point in time, the SAB does not have the authority to adjust the per pupil grant amount for alternative education pupils. Such significant changes in the funding model can be addressed via legislation or such as a future bond bill.
Discussion? Questions? Cesar?
Just a question on the original intent of the legislation. I'm not familiar with it. Why did they even start with the loading standard? Do you know some historical perspective on that?
Are you asking where they got the number from?
Yeah, AB 695.
I don't know if we have that information where they came up with 18. I don't think we know that. We did have a survey that we conducted. The results of that were in the report. That was back from was it 2003?
Yes.
And it seemed as though the majority of the data we got back indicated that they are loaded at about an average of 18 per pupil. So that was consistent with the legislation. That was by a survey that we conducted.
Anna, do you actually have an answer to that?
The legislation,
and
oh, sorry, Ana Ferreira, County School Facilities Consortium. The legislation, AB 695 Mazzoni, was a bill that kind of came after the SB 50 bond, basically to look at some areas that were not fully addressed in the bond and to go back and make clarifications. And so special education was included there and alternative education was included there because the loading standards didn't, needed to be adjusted. And we would say also that the funding authority piece was also in there as well.
Thank you. Questions? Chris?
Just a comment. I'd like to point out that alternative education on average receives $10,000 per ADA for revenue limit funding, whereas a traditional school receives on average approximately $6,000 per ADA for revenue limit funding.
David?
Yeah. Dave Walrath, representing Small School District Association. That argument is made 4 times in front of the legislature and been rejected all 4 times. Revenue limit is for operational, not for facilities. If you look at the development of the alternative ed revenue limit, it was on the cost of teachers versus loading versus everything else, and never once, except for juvenile halls, did it include capital facilities. It included capital facilities for juvenile halls because the counties were running those programs, not school districts. The presentation made is technically accurate. The implication, I believe, is inaccurate.
Okay, let's go back to the committee. Let's Margie and then Bill.
So with regard to the changing of the loading standard, I'm looking at page 6 in review of the funding methods for these schools. It says that AB 695 gave the SAB the authority to adjust the loading standard, but you haven't done it because you're not experienced or you're not experts at it. But we do have experts at loading, and that would be the California Department of Education. And, I mean, you surveyed school districts, but CDE can tell you what the loading standard can be. And so what I'm wondering is, could we at least get the loading standard changed? Because it doesn't require legislation to change the loading standard. And that's what we would like to see, at least have that piece happen. While you lack expertise, you certainly tell us that it's 27 for high school, and you tell us that it's 25 for K-5, or whatever it is, 27, 25. You tell us all those. So if you need help, we'd be happy to get CDE to tell you what the loading standard should be. Sorry, Michael. For these type of kids, because it's been a problem. We've been trying to get it fixed since 695, and so we'd like to at least have you get that piece. If you can't do the other pieces, we'd like to see you do that piece.
Juan, briefly.
Just to clarify, Margie, we don't tell you what the loading standard is. That's in statute for 25 and 27, so it's not us. And also, if we do change the loading standard without changing the per pupil grant amounts, it has a resulting effect on the amount per classroom. Just want to point that out, that we can, but it's going to have a reduction. If we go, for example, down to 18 students per classroom, you change the loading standard, but you don't change the per pupil grant amount, that's the net result. Just wanted to point that out there.
Bill?
Yeah, I just want to take, kind of responding to what Chris was saying and also what Dave mentioned. I mean, just if you take the experience of my school district and the school district that I live in, I would say that community alternative education students are housed in the worst leftover facilities in every single district in California, that they are housed in portables. There is never enough money available to build their facilities. They have no core facilities. These kids are on the margins already. They're all at risk, and we're putting them in to essentially the crumbs of our districts. And when districts do build nice facilities, Berkeley Unified, where I live, we just built a great facility, all locally funded, because local districts sometimes will make a commitment to do that. These kids get the bottom of the barrel, and it's time that we made an adjustment. The implication that they get a lot of money for operating doesn't have anything to do with what it takes to build facilities for them.
Mamie?
Mamie Starr, County Superintendents Association. One is correct in that if we reduce the loading standard, there does need to be a commensurate adjustment in the grant amount, and Bill is correct that we have a difficult time doing the adequate facility for these students as it is now. And I'd like to point out particularly county offices and small school districts that are hardship, that if you're a small school district, you're burning up a lot of grants where you may need 2 facilities, but you're using all your grants up to build just 1, so you still have an inadequate housing for those special needs students. And county offices, of course, are hardship and have a significant number of alternative education and expelled pupils.
Chris?
I know I've stated this at previous meetings. The Department of Finance continues to believe that the state's constitution allows county offices of education to incur debt and would negate then the financial hardship status, and we continue to believe that that is Article 16, Section 18, Paragraph 2.
Quick question to staff. In your report, you say that you would need legislation to change the base level of funding. If I'm hearing that, yes, maybe the appropriate loading standard is 18, but they get funding off of 25, and so even to make these feasible for construction, we would actually need to look at the base grant amount. So you say that legislation is needed. Can you further explain why you believe that?
We had an original opinion from our attorney contained in the report from 2003, and we had that reaffirmed recently. And basically, there's a handout that I think all the members should have gotten. Looks like this. There's 2 paragraphs, and you can see that highlighted is the differences in the two pieces of legislation there that we feel, or at least our attorney feels, prohibit us from making an augment to the grant amount.
Can you share what that says?
Sure.
I'll get Anna. I know where you're going. Let me finish with the IMP committee members, and then I'll open it up to you. Yes.
I don't want to steal Anna's thunder, but I am reading the letter that she prepared for this County School Facilities Consortium. What's the difference between the adjustment to the grants that were made for special education and the adjustments recently that would be proposed or needed if we were to keep the funding level adequate and reduce the loading standard? I mean, wasn't special education funding increased by the SAB without legislation?
Not to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. One, yeah.
I don't know.
There's provisions in I think the changes between, and I'm talking about Education Code Section 170.72.17 and .15. When we had the SDC,
it's a special education statute reference.
Yeah, there was. We believe some flexibility in Section 170.72.15 that allowed SDC to get changes into the per pupil grant amount. And that's, I don't want to read the whole thing, but basically it talks about, in conjunction with the State Department of Ed and DOF, the LAO shall review the method of funding the construction and modernization of school facilities for special education pupils and the amount provided per in-house special education pupil pursuant to sections 170.72.10 and 170.74.10. That section, the amount provided per the in-house, is something that was excluded from the section that talks about alt ed. And while I don't want to put words into our attorney's mouth, that's what I believe was a difference that allowed the SDC to get changes into the per pupil grant amounts, but the alt ed doesn't have that same provision in that section.
So you're saying that the method of funding under the 72.17 is not broad enough to essentially cover the more specific sentence of and the amount provided per unhoused special education pupil?
I believe so.
Or that's what your attorney probably thinks.
That's the opinion. Okay. Of the attorney. As we all know, attorneys can disagree, but that's the opinion. That's the opinion of OPSC attorney. Yeah, and Anna, go ahead. As members, this is the letter provided by Anna as to what Bill was referencing.
Chair, if I may, the highlighted section that's provided by staff, and there is a difference, I agree, but pertains to the report that was requested. And the reality is the action section for the board simply states that, that the board may recommend modifications to the funding method based on the report. So that is not, that is not direction to the board. That is direction for the report that would result in recommendations to the changes for a funding method. We believe that funding method means the loading standard and accompanying grant amount. It would make no sense to change the loading standard and not change that accompanying grant amount. We believe also the 17071.25 also states in Section C, the section that pertains to Community Day, it says teaching stations assumed capacity adjustments pursuant to these regulations and any other adjustments of existing school capacity could also be made. And so we really truly believe that this could encompass grant amounts. It makes no sense to do it without it. It was not the intent of legislation to simply change one thing and not have the grants adjusted. It could be as simple as looking at that new grant number and dividing by the number of, taking 27 and dividing by 18. And it could be that very simple. And we do believe that there is the ability that the board has here to make those changes without new legislation. And we're happy to talk to Legislative Council to get another opinion if that's what you need to go forward. But it's stunning when I look at the staff report. When you look, it's been 10 years that this has been without action. And these kids, this population is growing in many parts of the state, And we're going to have a much bigger problem if we don't already with this population, simply because we can't figure out how to adjust the grant amount as well.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I agree with staff that there isn't anything in law right now to change the per pupil grant allowance. I disagree with staff that we can't make an adjustment to accommodate those needs and that they are already available to us, and that adjustment is already authorized by the State Allocation Board through legislation. And here's where I'm going with this. The problem that the districts are having right now with alternate education is if you give us just a high school per pupil grant allowance for 18 kids, we lose 9 kids worth of dollars to build the classroom and its support facilities that they need. Okay? But there's nothing in the law that says you get anything more than a 9/12 allowance in dollars. But we do have in Article 9 of our own regulations, the board's regulations, I think it's 1859-83, where the board has the authority to make adjustments to all various kinds of costs. In there are things like elevators, there's the cost for what is a small school, what is a small project, etc. Within the new small school formula, you already have, and staff even devise a process for additions to campuses, where you can ask for a single small school of less than 10 classrooms, I think, on an alternate ed basis, and you will receive a minimum amount of dollars. So you take the 18 grants times the per pupil grants, compare that to the minimum number that you would get for that one class, and you get the larger of the two. Those values are there. The board has the authority to change those regulations, and those numbers have been approved, unless you're going to say that the board did not have the authority to create those charts. And then staff, in past board actions, said that if you've built a school under that premise of a new school, and you choose to do an addition to one, there was a process to adjust it based on what you received before, because some of the support facilities are encompassed within that chart, depending on the number of classrooms that are in there. So yes, I believe we have the tool to be able to make the dollars work. Then it's just a matter of someone deciding what is the loading standard, and it sounds like there's been some consensus at 18. Thank you.
I think I can quickly summarize this and what our steps would be in moving forward. Tom, briefly, or you make sure you're not repeating.
I'm not repeating. I really have a question. Because we've learned...
Tom Duffy.
Tom Duffy with Cash. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. We've learned that in doing the audits that OPSC is conducting, that they're asking questions about the use of classrooms and the use of other facilities. So my question is, if I've applied for and received funding to build one or more classrooms that are community day schools at 27, and I've got them loaded at 18, is that something that is going to end up being an MI because I'm not operating it with 27, although I was funded at 27? So, well, those are the kinds of questions, Juan. I saw the perceptible shake of your head, but those are the kinds of things that, going back to the earlier discussion, how do we know what you're going to look at and what is reasonable to look at? If I'm operating a school, I take the funds, I build the school, but I've got to deal with the population that's in my district. I've got to deal with the need. And sometimes there may be fewer children, sometimes there may be more. But I think with the kinds of discussions we had this morning, maybe we need to answer that question directly. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Tom, the new construction grant amounts for funding are based on projections, enrollment projections, as you well know. So those students may or may not be loaded at 25 or 27. In fact, some classrooms may not be housing students at all after they build them. There is no requirement that they have to have 25 and 27 students after they're built, because that's what the loading capacity was based on.
those kinds of questions have been asked at audit. So when your auditors have been in the field. So that's why I brought that up. It is helpful, and I've suggested this to Ann Sheehan when she chaired the allocation board, and to Rob Cook, that it may be helpful for OPSC staff to have some in-servicing on really what goes on in school districts, to give them a sense of how do you operate schools. And maybe everybody be more comfortable with that. But thank you for your
Tom,
answer.
I think this is also something you should bring up next Monday.
Okay. Thank you. I will.
Deborah?
Just a question and a comment on Tom. I mean, these classes, he is right. It's a revolving door, and it's, you know, the most high-risk children in your district. And on any given day, you could have 3 to 10 to 15 to 27. So, I mean, you need to understand that as expulsions go. Some years are good years, some years not so good in a school district. But when you first opened up, you talked about, and maybe I misunderstood you, that section 1702.10 and 1704.10 allowed special ed to make that adjustment. Is that what you said? You have it highlighted.
Yeah, 170.72.15 versus 170.72.17.
Deborah, just on the plain reading, and this is just me, attorney plain reading, if you want to look at it at 1707.2.15 has the and in it, where 17 does not have the and in it, and I think that's what the attorney was making reference to as to the authority of the State Allocation Board to adjust the base level of funding. So I think since that kind of gets to the heart of, you know, the disagreement of staff report and what Anna said, what my recommendation would be in summarizing these differences, as we all know attorneys disagree. Let's find a neutral mediator, draft a request to Legislative Council to ask for an opinion on the authority. Does SAB have to do this, looking at the certain code sections, so we can hear back? And then this is Lisa Kaplan as a school board member. We have one of the top alternative education, Discovery High School in our district. We loaded at 18. It is in a new building. We went into our pocket to build it, and these kids succeed because of how we built the school and how we load it, knowing that you're right, Bill, kids are not necessarily given the deference and are put into facilities that really don't optimize success. So we do know per CDE and other that 18 generally works with alternative education. Knowing that loading standard, I personally will move over to that side and oppose any change of the loading standard at this point, because what district's going to come in if you load it at 18 and grant it at 18, and right now it's at 25? It's already a disadvantage in funding. So first and foremost, what I'm hearing from you as well is, so let's get the Leg Council opinion to see what the authority is, because SAB will also ask for that. Go to SAB with, or come back here, but also present it to SAB. But at the same time, not make any adjustments in the loading standard, because that wouldn't necessarily optimize what we're the intent of what we're trying to get at. Do I have agreement, disagreement, see things differently? Is that okay? We have consensus. Anna, briefly.
And that's basically it, Madam Chair. We want it to reflect reality, and so, you know, we would be fine with that.
Wow, yay. Second item, we have consensus. Shall we move on? Thanks, staff. I appreciate it. So we're moving on to item number 4 on the agenda, Career Technical Education Facilities Program Changes. What I'd like to see is us go through this, and after we're done with this, break for lunch, and whenever that may be, we then have an hour lunch so that we can move along in the agenda for items 5 and 6 after lunch. Is that okay? All right. Share the mic. Staff?
Good morning.
Good Morning.
We are bringing back 3 items relating to CTE. This is the 3rd time to be heard by Implementation Committee there for these. Let's see. My name is Nathan Higgins.
Good morning, Nathan. It's okay. We don't bite. I promise. We don't bite. Well, how about this? I'll let them not bite you too hard. Just look to me for protection. You know, let me do the fight back.
I appreciate that. The 3 items that we're bringing back is the proposed increase to the reservation of funds timeline, going from the existing 12 months to a 3-month extension to 15 months. The second would be the adjustment to the CTE apportionment. What we're proposing is a minor change to a previous proposal where, in the instance where 50% of a verified cost for a CTE project would see a reduction in apportionment, the change that we are proposing is including a 5% allowance into this due to there was some concern brought up that reducing an apportionment would put undue risk upon a district, possibly underfunding a project. And the third issue would be the remittance of savings. We have Ngazi Pruitt and Steve Inman that will be discussing that after we get through the first 2 items.
My name is Julius McIntyre. Hello, everyone. Good morning. As far as regarding the first issue, some committee members at our first 2 instances here at the IMP committee expressed support for the increase of the reservation of funds timelines. Staff will prepare the proposal for the State Allocation Board for consideration. That item was pretty much in overall support. Our second issue is the most controversial of our 3 items. Staff recommends adjusting the apportionment upon completion of plan review and cost verification in the event that 50% of the verified project costs are less than the apportionment. Some members of the IMP committee expressed concern that these reductions are based on cost estimates. Projects may not have been bid, therefore do not represent the actual cost of the project, thus putting additional risk on the district. Staff proposes applying an additional 5% to the verified project cost if the verified project cost, including the additional 5%, is below the amount the apportionment was derived from. An adjustment, particularly a reduction, would occur. This method would ensure equity between reservation of funds projects and construction-ready projects. We intend to treat both type of CTE projects the same. Applications that require a reservation of funds and projects that have approved plans and specs at the time of apportionment. Staff recommends the proposed regulation changes and the attached proposed changes to the Form SAB 5010. It's the proposed changes to our application and the reg language found from pages 9 through 12 of your handout.
This new method is illustrated on the next page where we have the 2 examples which would show excuse me. The first example would be a scenario where, in the case of a conceptual cost estimate, having $1 million total project cost, if it comes back as a verified amount that is larger than the 5% difference, it would see a reduction. The second example illustrates where if the difference in the verified cost amount would be below the 5% difference, it would see no reduction. So there is that threshold where we wouldn't be nitpicking dollar for dollar, looking for reductions.
Absolutely.
There would be some leeway.
We'll continue on with on stamp page 8 with the remittance of savings. I'll begin with discussion from the last IMP, followed by staff clarifications listed on page 8, followed by proposed regulatory language, and finally a walk through the CTFP savings calculation worksheet. During the last IMP, discussion centered around various methods of calculating interest and how to track it. The OPSC responded that as long as the districts have interest allocation procedures in place, which are well documented, and amounts appear to be reasonable, the district should consider themselves prepared if interest claim was audited. In addition, I'd also like to add that allocation is a key concept in accounting, including government school accounting. Facilities accounting staff should be knowledgeable of procedures regarding interest allocation. If not, districts should consult their COE. I'd also like to add that it would be inappropriate for the OPSC to provide the mechanics for interest allocation because that is a management function of the districts. However, I can say in a broad sense of the word that interest allocation is based on proportions, so that's one commonly accepted methodology. In some cases, districts have computerized systems that do the interest allocations also. So I just wanted to go over some of that discussion from the prior IMP. Okay, as a result of discussion, the OPSC is providing the following clarifications on stamp page 8. Districts should report only interest on state funds. The savings, which includes any unspent interest earned on state funds, would be returned to the state when the district submits a final form SAB 5006 to the OPSC for the CTFP project. Should the district not earn interest on state funds, the district shall provide an explanation, for example, reimbursement of expenses. If no explanation is provided, the OPSC shall calculate interest based on the Pooled Money Investment Board rate, and that would be from the time of the fund release, the date of the fund release, through the signature date on Form 5006. Upon receipt of the final form SAB 5006, the OPSC would recommend to the board that the apportionment be reduced by the amount of savings realized on the project. In addition, some changes are proposed to SFP regulations for savings and program accountability to include applicable references to the CTEFP program. If you turn to page 9, I'll begin with those. Stamp page 9. Section 1859.103, savings. You can see language is added in the second sentence. The grants for the projects funded pursuant to 1859-70.2, sections 1859.180 or section 1859.190 having to do with career tech shall be limited to eligible expenditures up to the state apportionment, including interest earned on state funds for the project except as specified in section 1859.184.1D. So that's the proposed language for 1859.103 savings. If we move down to 1859.106 program accountability, we see a similar addition in the center underlined for specific to the career tech program. So those are the two major changes for accountability on page 9. We move to page 12. Stamp page 12. Last section, 1859.199, program accountability. Second paragraph, we've added language. Projects will be subject to program reporting requirements pursuant to section 1859.104 and a program accountability expenditure audit pursuant to section 1859.106. Basically, what this language does is require the same reporting standard for SFP projects, new construction and modernization. Year after the fund release, your first 5006 comes in, every year after that. Okay, we've added that to the career tech program. Third paragraph, an applicant district may not retain savings by a career tech educational facilities project. The savings, which includes any unspent interest earned on state funds, must be returned to the state when the district submits the final form SAB 5006 to the OPSC as set forth in section 1859.104A. Okay, that just reiterates what we talked about on page 8. Should the district not earn interest on state funds, the district shall provide a written explanation. If an explanation is not provided, the OPSC shall calculate interest on the savings amount from the date the warrant was released from the state controller to the date of the Form SAB 5006 submittal to the OPSC at the pooled money investment account interest rate at the time the warrant was released. The key concept behind this is districts should have an interest allocation and tracking method in place. Again, it's a common procedure amongst school districts. Some of their federal programs require interest to be tracked also, and it's a key accounting principle. So the expectation is the districts would be able to provide information if requested by the auditor. And I'm not saying the auditor would request that all the time, but if it was requested, the district would be able to provide that. If not, the sanction would be applied, you see here. The last section, we want to walk through the Career Technical Education Facilities Program worksheet on stamp page 13.
Gazi Pruitt, Supervisor, Fiscal Services, OPSC. I would like to refer board and members to pages 13 and 19 of the handouts. Okay, page 13 has the worksheet that was developed to help the school districts and the joint power authorities in calculating the actual savings plus interest that needs to be returned to the state. Going down through the form, we've listed the item numbers A through H. And the first item is the district needs to list the name of the district, the name of the school, project number, the SAB allocation date, the date the warrant was released by the state controllers. And if you notice, the form has been redesigned to capture the 50% share for the district and the state in terms of the total amount of cost that is allocated. So item number F is the district share of cost. And then G captures the state share of cost. And then H is the total expenditure starting from when the project initiated till the notice of completion was issued. And that figure can be found on the form detailed listing of project expenditure that is usually attached with the 5006. So the total amount has to be written on this column, and it has to be transferred over to the 5006. If you look at page 19, column number 6, that's where that figure has to be recorded. Then moving down to item number I, which is the total savings. And to calculate the total savings, it will be the addition of item number F, which is the district share, plus item number G, the state share, and you subtract the expenditures, and the balance will be the total state savings. Sorry, the balance is supposed to be the total savings. And if you need to apportion the state savings, it will be just divide that by 2, since the allocation basis is 50-50. And then when you get down to number 2, which is the interest on the state funds, this amount needs to be transferred over to column 6 of the Form 5006 on page 19. And then number 3, can I go back to the interest portion of it? The interest has to be earned from the date the warrant was released by the State Controller's Office up to the date the Form SAB 5006 was submitted to OPSC. And if there was no interest reported, the school district or the Joint Power Authority, in terms of modernization project, will then have to provide a written explanation attached with this document. Item number 3 will be the total savings to be returned to the state. And bear in mind that that savings also includes the interest calculated. So it's the addition of line item 1 and 2 will give you that amount, and that has to be transferred over to line item 7 on the SAB 5006 form. Once this amount is determined, a check will need to be issued with a total amount on line item 3, and this check will have to be attached with the worksheet and a completed form SAB 5006 and mailed to the Department of General Services, the address listed below. Savings returned is based on the district's estimate. This report will be subject to an audit, which could result in an adjustment if there is any findings. So when you go back to the page 19, which is the SAB 5006, what you'll then have will be on the shaded column, the previous report, the report period, and the total to date. The amount of the district fund or the joint JTP will be recorded accordingly based on, if this is the initial 5006 report, then it will have to be the initial amount that was allocated to the district, same as the state fund amount. And then interest earned will be captured accordingly based on the reporting, the percentage of completion of the project. If it's 100%, then OPSC is required to have the district have the total amount that was distributed to state and then to the district, and then the total of the state funding, plus all the expenses starting from inception of the project till the completion of the project. And then line item 7 will then capture the amount of savings. And that savings amount includes any interest earned. And then there's a certification at the bottom here by the school district who prepared the document. That's the modification that we've made on the forms.
I'd like to add one more comment in here. And again, my name is Steve Inman, OPSC Audits. We've added a different statement here requesting only districts to report only state interest. This is probably new out here. The reason being, and we're going to address this in item number 6 later on today, we know that the issue may not be stated clearly on Form 5006 and in our outreach material. So we're going to be consistent among the CTE program and the SFP program later on when we discuss it, that all we need is state savings to determine the state share of, or a state share of interest to determine the state share of savings. That's all we're interested in, primarily. We're interested in the state share of savings, which includes the state share of interest. So we're including that language on the CTFP worksheet, okay? And we'll introduce that later on with the discussion of Form 5006. So the worksheet is pretty straightforward in terms of determining base savings and then adding state interest to it, resulting in total state savings.
Thank you. As we open it up to implementation committee members, I want to start a process that your questions as we go through at this point relate only to item 1, and then we'll go item 2, and then we'll go item 3. So what I heard staff say, and I can maybe take care of item 1, is that there is a general consensus, except for DOF, on the extension of the timeline. If there is not, that's what the discussion is going to be around. Margie, I saw you. Raise your hand.
Great. So I want to make sure, what happens to the projects in second cycle? Did those get 15 months? Or those be right for an extension? The ones that got stuck on the December 10th agenda? Okay. So do we get 15 months for the second cycle project as well, or only for the third cycle? Because this is only third cycle. Do we have it for the second cycle already, 15 months?
Actually, the first and second cycles were granted
a 12-month extension.
Exactly.
So we have 24 months.
Effectively, that's what's happening.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that...
And I would note that on the December 10th list, now that they've all received funding.
Absolutely.
The
second
funding
cycle,
that would cover the
Unfunded
apportionments.
mandates.
Apportionments, right. The second cycle extensions were up to 12 months. It just depended on what the district requested, up to 12 months, but not all projects did receive the 12 months.
So item number 1 is the 12 to 15-month extension for funding cycle 3 only at this point, unless we establish under other funding cycles, correct? Okay. Sean, then Gary?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had this question before, but on the career tech programs, what's the dollar value of the apportioned projects today? That's it.
We currently have over $90 million left out of originally $500 million. Currently in CDE, there's over $200 million in request for that same $90 million.
Okay, and then you already have approved and apportioned projects, right?
We have approved and apportioned some projects, yes.
Because there's a lot of career tech projects that are approved and apportioned that do not have DSA or CDA approvals, right? Or do they?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
There are a lot, and I don't know, this is a question I'm trying to get. There's a lot of career tech projects that are approved and apportioned that do not have DSA and CDA approvals.
Some projects may or may not need, depending on what they're building, depends if they need DSA or CDA approval.
Because I saw where they still don't have that 18-month timeline yet because they're going through DSA, right? I saw in that apportioned list, there's a whole amount of projects that do not have any.
Approximately how many reservation of funds do we still have that have not come in for their, what we refer to as conversion?
Out of the first cycle, I think we have it about 10 or 12, about a dozen out of the first cycle so far. And second cycle, offhand, it would be
It's a much greater number. It's a much greater number.
Isn't it like, I mean, we did some off the cuff number, like $230 million. Is that about right? And the reason I'm asking is just one, the magnitude, and two, the timing of when those projects will go forward, because there's a bigger issue here that you're talking about $230 million that have funds set aside for those projects that could have upwards of 12 months extension plus 18 months, upwards of 2 years to 3 years before they have to receive those funds. And I don't know how that's going to impact. I mean, to me, I've got a concern that where's the priority for shovel-ready projects. I mean, it just seems to be like we've put a stopgap on $230 million that might not be built for 2 years. So
I know it's not my... Can I answer Gary's question?
Yes.
Thank you.
Unless staff had a response, Masha.
I wanted to ask just to specify what 18-month were you referring to? Is it the 18-month to fund release? Is that what you were referring to? But this first proposal would have no impact on this first or second cycle projects, so that would not change that situation with those still being outstanding.
But those are portion projects, but they don't have DSA. When does the 18 months start? After they get DSA CD approval?
The 18 months begins at the date of the acceptance letter.
So the typical project would receive a reservation of funds, then it would
Which they have now. We've got this $230 million sitting there.
So they have 12 and potentially up to 24 months. They submit their DSA approval and CD approval of the project to the OPSC. The OPSC reviews, issues the acceptance letter that gives them the ability to go to ask for a fund release, which they have 18 months for.
So they've got
But it doesn't prevent them from starting to build.
But right now what you're saying is they have up to 2 years to get their DSA CD acceptance letter, and then that triggers another 18 months before they start construction. Is that correct?
I just want to make sure we stay on topic because we are discussing item 1 of
Well,
just
it's
the...
on topic in terms of the timing, and it has a huge impact.
But this is only cycle 3, and I think it's more of a general philosophical guideline that we need to look into at OPSC is what's the ramifications of these extensions as we move forward, especially with the time, which you bring up a good item for discussion. I'm just wanting to make sure we stay on topic for this one. If we're talking about with amending these guidelines, it's only cycle 3. Let's, which I think that your conversation is a bigger conversation.
Right.
But I'm just trying to move things on.
Now I get a better understanding of cycle 3, which we're dealing with.
And cycle 3, those projects do not have, the board cannot extend their, like right now they'd be, if this regulation didn't go forward, cycle 3 projects come in, all they have is 12 months to get their final approvals. Because the fiscal crisis regulations for CTE sunset January 1st. So these projects, the cycle 3 ones that are coming to us in March, all they're going to be able to get is either 12 months or plus 18 plus this additional 3 months if it's
Sean, and then you're good. Okay.
Okay. The proposal for regulation section 1859.197.
Is this just relating to item 1?
This is related to item 1. Your proposal, if you look at section D, stamp page 11, sorry.
Yes.
And then if you look at section D, the change is to add and verified by the OPSC. The way that reads, it sounds like your 15 months starts after we've submitted the CDE and DSA approvals, which I know is not your intent. So I would suggest taking out the and verified by OPSC, and then changing D2 to read, has 18 months from the date CDE plan approval and DSA approved plans and specifications as needed are verified by the OPSC to submit completed Form 5005. I think that's more consistent with what you're trying to do.
Thanks, we'll look into that.
Definitely take that into consideration.
Okay, so for the most part, we have consensus on item. Any public comment? Tom, as I see you walk up.
I'm Duffy for Cash, if I may, Madam Chair. Chris, what's the objection that Finance has to this?
The extension from 12 to 15 months. We'd prefer to see them completed and processed within the 12 months. We want to see these projects undertaken. We want to see these projects ultimately completed. They are projects that we want to see done.
And we do also, but we don't get to control the agencies that approve them.
And as I previously stated, we're willing to work with whatever agencies that approve these to ensure that those 12 months can be met.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. All righty. So with general consensus on item 1, let's move to item 2. Any questions in regards to adjustment of the CTE? The CTE apportionment, too many acronyms here. We'll start off with Bill and then Deborah.
I have a comment. I mean, we have discussed this already twice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, I want to... All right. We've discussed this twice, and I appreciate that staff did incorporate some of our suggestions related to what I would call shifting the risk from the state to school districts. I'm not sure that you went as far as I would have gone, and I still don't quite understand. I mean, I understand the interest in treating projects that already have approvals as close as you can to the same as all the projects that come in without those previous approvals. But really, again, I think we want this program to be successful. This is a program that all of the legislature and the governor and everyone in the state of California wants to be successful. Are we doing something that is going to impact a district negatively and make them unable to complete a project successfully? And I still don't think we're quite there, because you're essentially asking a whole group of districts to give back money that they've been apportioned prior to doing the project. And, if the shoe was on the other foot, we couldn't come back and ask you for more money, right? but the state is basically coming in and saying, notwithstanding that you haven't done the project, give us the money back based on our cost estimate. You can have 5%, which, by the way, if it's a modernization project, and CTE projects can be modernization projects, a more effective or a more industry standard contingency would be 10%. I think we just need to look at this. Don't create a condition where you're going to negatively impact the ability to complete a project, which is what potentially is being done. That's my comment.
Okay, Juan briefly, and then we're going Deborah, Chris, Margie.
Thanks, Bill. I'm actually glad you brought this up because this is something that I had staff clarify for me in terms of what is included in the cost estimate when it gets submitted as a reservation, because I was under the understanding that there were some certain allowances on top of the actual cost that we allowed. Can you guys go through what type of things we allow in terms of additional allowances for the reservation cost?
Yes.
Estimate, please.
At the bottom of our recommended cost estimate, which is found online, we do prefer districts use our preferred format, not something that we demand or enforce. As long as they give us an estimate that provides a sufficient amount of detail, we would be fine with that. But on our preferred format at the bottom, you will find the following percentages. There will be a 9% contingency, which includes soft costs at 9%. Keep in mind, before I run through these numbers, that these percentages are compounded upon one another. In my personal opinion, very lenient towards the school district's behalf. General requirements, overhead, profit, and bonds also at 9%, 8% for design fees, 1% for inspection, 4% for escalation, DSA fees, 0.7%, and a 10% design contingency, which we have.
Up to that amount for all of these. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so to clarify, what staff is proposing is that all of the generous allowances that are here, and we could probably talk about those until we're blue in the face, but anyway, so all the allowances that are included at the bottom of the estimate worksheet, creating a total project cost, there would be an additional 5% as a project contingency is what you're proposing on top of that?
Yes.
Well, actually, at these percentages given for our template, these are in the case of a reservation of funds. Now, once at the DSA approved level, the 10% contingency that you may have on the apportionment drops off. You no longer have the 10% contingency, however.
It's the design contingency.
The design contingency, thank you. We are adding the 5% on top of that at that point.
Is the PVT going to be reviewing these? How are they reviewed?
We actually brought a PVT plan reviewer who does review the CTE projects with us if you have any additional specific questions regarding that. As far as the design fees, of course, once the project has already been designed, there's no further need for that part. So, of course, that would drop off.
Design contingencies.
Yes.
Yes. Once, yeah.
Design until I'm with PVT. And I just want to clarify just so you know, that when you guys come in for the original apportionment, the 10% is allowed because you don't have final working drawings yet. When they come in and submit the plans to the plan verification team, we get rid of that 10%. That 10% is for the apportionment only. They're proposing that we give you an additional 5% that we weren't allowing. So that when you come in with the final cost estimate, you have the final working drawings that are DSA approved, you're going to get an additional 5% contingency for unforeseen costs, on top of all the other soft costs that you're getting. The 10% is just for the apportionment only. So that's not a 10% with another 5% added on, Bill. I want to make sure there's clarification on that. So, so that's not what you're getting. You're not getting 15%. You're going to get 10% initially for the apportionment, and then when the final working drawings come in and PVT reviews that cost estimate, we're going to give you an additional 5%.
And just to clarify, I think some concern in my original question is, why are we doing this prior to bid?
If we were to wait for a project to be under bid, we would have to have a full third review of the project to verify what's included on the bid.
We just submit the cost of the project.
This is simply to really, again, reflect the fact that if the project were to come in and receive funding, already having the DSA and CDE approved plans and essentially be a ready-to-go project, that it would not receive those costs that we've identified as, it would not receive the, some of the, let's say, for example, the project was estimated roughly at $3 million when the final cost estimate comes in at $2.5 million. If the project were to come in already ready to go, it would only receive an apportionment of 2.5 or half of the $2.5 million. That is simply to address that. Changing the any kind of funding determinations based on bid would require an entire program overhaul to where we would have to fund everybody based on that bid amount. So this is simply to just reflect when the program was originally set up, there was an option provided, but it wasn't thought through that the option that was provided would result in projects receiving, the second category of projects being reservation of funds projects, receive funding that other projects did not. And so simply to correct that original flaw of the program rather than to revamp the entire funding scheme at this point, given that, third cycle and 2 cycles have already been administered under a certain set of rules.
Okay, we have Deborah, Chris, Margie, then Dennis.
Deborah Pearson, SSDA. One clarification question and then 2 others. When, I think we talked about this in September, if I remember correctly, I don't have my binder, on the cycles with the reservation, isn't it, you're not going to cycles 1 and 2 for the interest, just cycle 3, correct?
For the interest, you said?
Right.
For the interest, are you talking about the third proposal or the second proposal?
The second proposal.
Second proposal would only apply to cycle 3 and beyond.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Next question. On the interest, I think we talked about this, and maybe Mamie could answer this for me. I thought we had talked about when the district received the money,
Okay,
not
Deborah,
when...
that's item 3.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's okay. You're ahead of yourself.
Okay. And lastly, and maybe this is number 3. If you do not have, or you don't require DSA, let's say you're just submitting for equipment, how does that work?
In that case, equipment would not be a reservation of funds. It would be ready to go. And just upon review,
there would be no need for a reservation of funds. The district would be able to request funds by submitting a form SAB 5005 immediately after apportionment.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you answering? Okay, then you're after Dennis. Sorry. I know. There's a process, Chris.
Just on a technical note, I noticed Bill referred to 5% contingency. It's actually 10%. It's 5% on the state share and 5% on the local share. So that's...
Okay. No, we're not having those. No.
It's 10% divided by 2.
Okay, we can agree to disagree.
Excuse me, can I correct that for a second?
Yes.
Are you talking about the 5% risk contingency that we're proposing? That would be on the total 100% cost estimate. So state share is 2.5%.
Okay, Margie, Dennis.
I'm commenting on section 2. Okay, so again, I'll agree with what the general consensus was last time we discussed this, which was to wait until the bid, give us the bid amount plus 10% and take the rest back. Masha's not listening to me.
Oh.
Sorry, Masha. Okay.
Sure, I'll be watching this back again.
Okay, it
over
is.
and over and over.
Over and over in your dreams. Okay. Or nightmares. The concern that we have is that you're not waiting until we bid. With this third round that's coming up, CDE has until February to score my applications high. And then OPSC will do their thing and the projects will move forward. And then we have 15 months to get our stamped plans and specifications in, and that moves us into the middle of 2011. And the concern is we don't know where the marketplace is going to be, and we would have given away money that normally would have been ours potentially for this project. And the concern is not that it's my cost estimate plus 5%. It's that it's the verified project cost. And that is never my cost estimate. And I know how that the PVT is working on being kinder and gentler, and that transformation is in progress, but it has not officially occurred. And the problem is that the verified project cost is never what we think it's going to cost. We always are getting, I've never had it come back and say, you can have more money, although Ian tells me that that's going to start happening. But it always gets whacked, either because we've done it wrong or we've asked for something we're not entitled to. But or I've asked for 4 sides of the street and I'm only allowed 2. Or whatever it is, I'm always getting cost whacked before I actually bid. And so I don't understand why we have to do this. I think you should wait until it bids, give us a 10% contingency, and then reduce it. And I think that's fair, as opposed to reducing it at audit. Thank you.
Okay. Dennis, then Sean.
Yeah, I would just like to build, Dennis Dunstan, I would just like to build on what Margie was saying. Cost estimates by their nature are historical data. They do not reflect the current nature of the market. And unfortunately, some cost estimating guides do a better job than Lee Saylor's does, but none of them give you today's market. And I think that to base the final cost on the estimate, which may be based on last year's cost, is not good. Doesn't do the district any good. I think it should be, as Margie said, I think it should be based on the actual construction cost rather than at the bid time, rather than on an estimate.
Okay, Sean?
Sean Allo, LAUSD. To the point that you are not eligible for reservation of funds if you don't have a DSA-approved project, I don't think districts necessarily know at the time that they request a reservation. I don't know that they're 100% certain about whether or not they need a DSA approval. It's possible they won't know until after the fact. What will you guys do then?
That would be something that would be discovered during the review process.
So will OPSC reject the project?
No. We would simply tell them that this scope of work would need a DSA or CDE approval. We would allow them to be apportioned as a reservation of funds, or we would tell them that it is not necessary and there's no need for a reservation of funds.
That suggests you know.
Excuse me?
I mean, it suggests you know whether or not DSA approval is required. If we don't know, I'm not sure how you would know.
We would have to consult with DSA to determine that before we make a funding recommendation as either apportionment or reservation of funds.
Quick question before we open it up to public comment, and this could be me learning things. As it was discussed, the OPSC verified project costs, do we have something for districts that is the objective verified standards? Like, what are the standards, the objective standards, so that districts know if it's the OPSC verified project cost and the district disagrees? Do we have an appeal process?
Yes, actually, there's when the OPSC requests the cost estimate, if it's not already provided by the district, we allow a 30-day letter to go out for the district to provide a cost estimate that's broken out with the required detail that we need for verification. At that point, we have a 15-day letter if there are any issues with
But I'm actually asking for what are the verifying standards for the project cost? Go ahead, Juan.
It's Lee Saylor.
Correct?
And that's standard to what we use for new construction as well as modernization for other programs. So that's something that it's not?
On none of the other programs, this is the only program that you verify building costs. On no other program do you verify building costs. You do the site work, which is Lee Saylor's, but on no other program do you verify building costs.
Right. Just to clarify, but the Saylor is what we use for all programs. That was the clarifying question.
Okay. Bill, and then open it to public comment.
I just wanted to, as I look on page 11 and look at the part that is being D that's being crossed out at the top, for whatever reason, the program when it was established created this category of projects that have the, without DSA and CDE approval, and didn't make any allowance for a grant reduction, as far as I can tell from here. In other words, what really looks to me like is the grant amount is reserved, will be the maximum here, and you would fund release that same amount, even though we would submit, under the current program, even if we submit a verified project cost that shows that it's substantially less. Is that correct?
That is currently how it is done, yes.
Okay, and so I guess I want to go back to this question again, and I think for me, and it sounds like for Margie, and I'm not sure why, if you're going to do, this is a special piece of this program, and presumably, in the wisdom of setting up the program, it made sense to do it because of this not having any approvals and the uncertainty about that. I don't see why we couldn't go back to moving the point of verification of total project cost to the bid point, as opposed to just the point where you come in with a cost estimate. It doesn't seem to me that that would make any difference in giving these projects any other advantage to the projects that already were going forward with their approvals when they came into the program, which seemed to be what your objection was to doing that. I mean, so again, my preference would be always creating the least possible risk to a successful project by moving that point. And we already have a special category of projects set up by the regulations here. Why are we messing with it to make it to an artificial date prior to bid?
Thank you. Open it. Yeah, Sean Robert. Sorry, Tom.
I have to disagree with you a little bit, Bill. I actually kind of agree with you, but we need to know prior to bid whether or not we're going to get the acceptance letter. Otherwise, we're not going to bid these projects. So we want to review prior to bid to ensure that OPSC is going to recommend that we keep our apportionment.
Yeah, so I don't want to clarify for Sean, but I think, or for Bill, I should say. Because I think all he's saying is, yeah, you submit, you get the reservation of funds, let's say it's $2 million. That stays the case until you have your DSA approved plans, and then beyond, even up until the point you bid the project.
For me, there's a little bit of risk that they're going to reject it at the point that we have DSA approval, in part because there have been cases where they say we have changed scope and that it may no longer be the same project. So because that's out there, we want to have some review before we go to bid.
And I appreciate, is it my turn now, Lisa?
Yeah.
Sorry, Dennis. I've been patient here.
You guys are on the same conversation back.
And so I appreciate the clarification, because I ignorantly was assuming that you would use the DSA cost estimate when you received the DSA approved plans and specs. So that's not the case. The PVT will do their own review. Just so I'm grounded in the proper understanding, the intent with giving money back or reducing the apportionment has to do with funding other projects sooner.
Yes, sir.
Because the way it currently resides, you're going to get the money back when the project's complete anyways if the apportionment was too large.
Which can be up to over 5 or 6 years.
My concern here is you run the potential of underfunding a project just to underfund another project. And so I know it's a long time to wait, but boy, it's just very risky for a district to wait until bid day and then not to be able to come back for additional money, because you're going to underfund projects as a result of this.
Juan.
Just to clarify, guys, the process would be the same, right? At the approval when the plans are submitted versus at the audit. So I'm not sure I understand, Rob, when you mentioned that some may get underfunded if the process isn't going to change.
So let's say it's a comprehensive high school. I come in for a $3 million apportionment. You take that at face value, and I get a preliminary apportionment of $3 million. 15 months later, I come in with my DSA approved plans. PVT comes back, says, sorry, it's 2.5. It's not $3 million. I go out to bid. Guess what? It's $3 million. I can't get my $500,000 back. So now I'm contributing $1 million towards the project just so you could potentially fund the $500,000 towards another project sooner, which could also be underfunded and probably will be.
How would that be handled right now, guys? Current process.
Right now, I would give the money back at my final 5006.
But you would still have to give the money back.
Yeah, but it would be savings, truly. It wouldn't be a proposed savings, a potential savings. It would be a true savings, if there was one. Now we're coming forward with potential savings 18 months prior to bid, potentially.
Dennis, I'm going to hold you off because Tom has been waiting patiently, and you jumped in on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Duffy again for cash. If I may, one, this is an apportionment. We have statutory language that says apportionments are full and final. So how could OPSC propose to take money back before a project has gone through all the cycles and gotten to an audit? Where is that authority?
We're proposing to make it a reservation. So it wouldn't be an apportionment.
But so you're proposing to change the way that but the allocation board is taking this action, right? But you're not going to call it an apportionment?
It would be called a reservation.
It would be called a reservation.
Versus an apportionment.
So, wait, just to clarify, because I'm jumping in the middle of here. So are we changing it from what used to be the current process of apportionment now to reservation of funding?
That's the proposal on the regs.
That's what I'm understanding.
We currently have authority to make apportionments in two ways. It's either a full and final apportionment when the district has DSA-approved plans and specifications, or it's the .193D that says that the district that does not have such approvals, the board may apportion funds and reserve them for a period of 12 months. So that's simply a reservation. So that authority currently exists, and the first cycles were administered using treating projects differently. Those that were ready to go and those that were not ready to go, given a 12-month window currently to obtain DSA plan approvals. So what is happening currently that we see as an inequity is those projects that came in and were ready to go and are currently constructing these facilities have received an apportionment that was based on hard construction costs verified by PVT, soft cost allowances that the team discussed, and they are running the same risks as not having enough money, or maybe their project just simply costs more than the cap that is established. At the end of the project, if there are any true savings realized, they'll be returning those savings. With the type of projects that receive a reservation of funds, which is column type B or whatnot, the districts receive potentially those funds that they wouldn't have otherwise received had they had their projects at the same stage as type A projects. So that is the main inequity that is currently inherent in the regulations as they're drafted right now and being used for 2 funding cycles.
So just for clarification, so you're saying you're going to you have a reservation of funds, say it's $3 million, then 15 months later they come in with DSA plans. Will you make your adjustment at that time? Okay. So, and then again at the end of the audit there'll be another adjustment. There'll be final reconciliation. Well,
Tom's got to finish. Okay.
And we created the critically overcrowded schools program where we didn't call it a reservation. We said it was preliminary apportionment. And we were very careful to allow districts to go to the nth degree to use that money because we believed in uncrowding schools. Well, it seems to me that we believe in career tech. We have the Department of Finance, we have the trades, we've got school districts, we've got contractors, everybody believes in this, but we're looking like we're trying to put constraints again on a program. And so if critically overcrowded schools had money basically parked for them until they got to the place where they could come in for that actual apportionment, why would we not do that with this? It's substantially less money, yes. It's a very important policy issue for districts and others, as I just mentioned. So we don't agree with this, and we will argue, Cash will argue that it should be that districts have the full extent of time to be able to make their projects work and to have a close working relationship with OPSC if that's how things work based on our discussions this morning. 2 other points, Madam Chair, if I may. This is substantial in writing. There's been a good deal
as long as it relates to item 2.
Yes, it does. So, but what I'm saying is item 2, you've got the content in the write-up here, and you did a nice job of presenting that, but it's not in the regulations. Why would that be?
Which part specifically is not in regulation?
What Juan and I have been talking about.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No.
There is a section that we need to add in terms of the 5% adjustment to apportionments versus reservations. That's something that we need to add. We did just realize that late last night. The other part, and I'm not sure if you're referring to section 1859.183.2, Tom.
Which page are you on?
This is stamp page 11. Are you talking about the reservation portion that's not added in regs? Is that, or is there a different section that you're?
I thought this was the reg section you're adding. Yeah. That's the 5% piece.
That's only for reservations. It's not for projects that come in with the construction ready with the plans. Give them the additional.
I see what you're saying.
So what am I missing here? Where is it? What you're proposing? What's in the write-up? Where is that embedded in the regs?
Which part of the write-up?
You're changing from an apportionment. You're going to a reservation of funds for a period of your proposed for.
That's on stamp page 11, 1859.183.2. That's where we talk about the reservation of funds apportionment.
Can I please clarify? I'm sorry to interrupt. What we are doing is the reservation of funds, that authority that existed under 193D, we are striking it out of 193 and we're moving it to 193.2. So that language is the same. We just felt that it belonged better in a separate section because 193, if you look at the header of it, talks about how much money a project gets. And then there's this little part D that talks about the fact that you may get a reservation. Since we're expanding rules on reservation of funds, we thought they better belong in a separate section. So we're moving that language into 193.2. So we're not eliminating it forever. We're just moving it.
Comment on that item? I mean, I think it goes back to the point that Tom brought up, which is.
Okay, no, we're actually, let's do public comment because then everybody else is going to get in. Let's finish public comment and then we can make comments on the public comment.
I'll just finish by letting you know that our contact with districts is that they're spending more than what they're getting under this program. So it seems there's much ado here, and is there really value to it? And there's a theme one, and the theme is we're trying to hold back the flow of funds.
Thank you.
Why
Lyle?
do you want to hold it?
Lyle Smoot, LA Unified, and I'm going to try not to be redundant with what Tom was talking about, but I'd be real blunt about it. There's no authority in the law to make a preliminary apportionment. There's no authority in the law to adjust a full and final apportionment in the way you're doing it. There's just no authority to do what you're proposing here. This is a full and final apportionment. Even your document today, your document the last time we talked said it was a full and final apportionment. And even this document today says the board may apportion funds for the career technical education project and reserve them as follows. If you made an apportionment, there's no authority to change that full and final apportionment until you get to the end of the line. I'm not sure there's an authority then, but there's definitely no authority to adjust it at the 12-month timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment before we go back to the board?
Richard Gonzalez Associates. I will not repeat what he said, but I will share and want to emphasize what Sean said, and that is a lot of the folks that I work with are relying on the letter of acceptance before they go to bid as being an assurance that the money's going to be there, that there isn't going to be some adjustment later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Dennis, then Bill, and Gary.
I'd like to go back to the final cost estimate, and I have a question for the gentleman from the plan verification unit. When you do your plan reviews, do you do by units on the plans exactly what's in the plans? Yes. So if we had something really extravagant in the plans, you don't make any judgment calls on that. You make an estimate on what's in the plans.
Yeah, it's on, we're using.
Wait, got to come to the mic. State your name.
Sorry about that. We're using the plans that are submitted.
And you are?
Ian Nutilla, sorry, with the plan verification team. We are using the DSA plans that are submitted in a cost estimate usually that's submitted with the career tech. It's a little bit different than the site development for additional grants. So I want to explain that to Margie. We are looking at what's in the plans. We're verifying the cost based on the plans, and we're using the Sailor unit cost. I understand that Sailor is a yardstick that we use in the plan verification team. It's not the perfect cost estimation guide, but it's the most perfect one that we found to use. There are some things that aren't in Sailor in a lot of those general divisions. If they're not, and there's an explanation that's made in that cost estimate as to why Sailor wasn't used, we're okay with that. And it's kind of a common sense determination. But we do look at the work that's in the plans. If there's something on the cost estimate that's not in the plans on these career techs, we're going to say we can't verify on the plans, because usually we're expecting all that work to be on those DSA approved plans that's coming in for verification.
Okay, as a follow-up to that, I'm going to, at the risk of opening a whole new can of worms here, if, for instance, using Rob's example, if we have a $3 million project and plan verification unit says that there's only verified $2.5 million, we go to construction, it comes in at $3 million. To reduce costs, we, for instance, change ceramic tile in the restroom part of this to FRP, a much lower cost material. Is that a material inaccuracy since the cost estimate was based on that?
That could be a simple additive, right? Alternate or deductive to the plan? I mean, that wouldn't be a, that, well, but that's not.
It would show up as a savings later on.
Yeah. I think we have laid out the guidelines that we thought would constitute a change of scope, and that wouldn't be one of them.
As we're discussing this, and I'm looking at the time, I'd like to call lunch at 12:30, but I'd like to have lunch 12:30 we're being done with item 2, and we can come back after lunch and discuss item number 3. Bill?
Thank you. I mean, I want to just take off a little bit on the discussion that Lyle and Tom had regarding the issue of apportionment, and I think because when I heard Masha's explanation, she said, well, this is really a reservation of funds, but the sentence that she read it from has the word apportion funds in it prior to the words reserve them. And I think what we're doing here by this new section 1859.193.2 is creating a new category of apportionment called a reservation of funds apportionment, and then you're creating the guidelines for that. And I think I just want to follow up with them. I don't know if you have that authority under law or not. And, you know, heads will shake in either direction depending on where you look. But it does strike me that you are creating a whole new category or trying to create a whole new category of apportionment, and, just some concern there.
Okay, Gary?
Yeah, I'd just like to throw my hat in the ring saying I think where OPSC has gone is really good and commendable for a couple reasons. One, I think by going where you're going to have really good costs based on DSA-approved plans, and I think, frankly, you're a little over-liberal now in terms of all the additional costs. But I think at least it's a really good position to be at for a couple of reasons. One, then when they go out to bid, at least the districts kind of know where they are. But more importantly, we know where we are in terms of the best knowledge at that time in terms of an apportionment. And right now we have very limited funds out there, and to the extent that we can narrow down, especially in this case, which is very unique, and oh, by the way, I think the Career Tech's a great program, the extent we can narrow down what the true cost will be in the apportionment is great, because then we will have more funds available for other projects. So we think what you're proposing is great. Thank you.
What I want to know from the IMP committee members is if, and what I'm hearing is you disagree with the timing of this. Some disagree whether OPSC has authority to create a new section of their regulations for reservation of funds apportionment, of one, whether there's authority, and two, if this is the direction to go. What I need to hear from you are recommendations on how to handle this issue. And Masha, or one of the staff, can you try and get at what is the premise exactly? What are we trying to solve? Because I think if we know the premise of what we're trying to solve, then we can look at what needs to be crafted to address that issue.
Can I give you an example? And it may take a few minutes for me to. So I have Project A and Project B. Okay, they're building a media center, for example. Project A wanted to do this for a long time. The law passed. They were excited. They went forward. They designed the project. They have a cost estimate. It's accompanied by plans and specs. They're ready to build. They're estimating that the project is going to cost them, for the sake of argument, $3 million. No, there's a $3 million cap, so let's not mess with that number. They're estimating that the project is going to cost them $2 million, and we see that as a well-baked estimate.
Mm-hmm.
We provide a state apportionment of $1 million.
Okay, is it an apportionment or reservation?
We provide an apportionment of $1 million. The project moves forward, and let's say it's a good bid climate, and the project realizes savings of $200,000. $100,000 of those savings belongs to us. So they return it if the third proposal goes forward with the...
At what time do they return it?
If the third proposal goes forward, they return that money to us with the Form 5006. Okay. We only see that project once in program services. We provide the apportionment, we're done with it. So we don't see that project ever again in program services. It's now just subject to audit. That's it.
Where is it? Does it apply to the PIW? Is there any PIW?
No, the PIW is strictly for our regular SFP new construction projects, not career tech.
Well, it's not just new constructions. Those projects that get new construction grants, which would include ORG, COS, those programs that are funded on the same formula.
Okay.
If you have Project B, the district wasn't ready. They just decided to throw their name in the hat. They think they may have a project for a media center. They estimate the project at that time, without plans and specs, costing $2 million. Okay? They get a reservation of funds under the rules that exist today that we're not rewriting. They get a reservation of funds. They are required to go back to OPSC and within a certain time frame and show us the final plans and specs, the cost estimate, and CDE approval, which we review. But at that point, if the bid climate is good and the $2 million estimate becomes a $1.8 million estimate, $200K savings at that point, there's no authority that we have to reduce their apportionment at that time. They get an acceptance letter from us, and they can come in and ask for funding in a fund release for $2 million. If that same project were to come in to the OPSC with plans and specs, they would only be entitled to $1.8 million, and that's the main inequity. There's no instrument at a later point in time and if, let's say, for example, everything goes as planned, we also get the $100,000 back. But there's no authority that we have if the district now says, oh, but I may upgrade some materials. They may spend the whole $2 million, enhance the project, great, but we will never see that money back. So that's the main inequity that exists in the program right now. So the acceptance letter that they receive tells them that, hey, by the way, we verified a fair amount, we will expect savings, but there's no real instrument for us to recoup that savings at the end. So that's really the main inequity. So this third cycle coming around, what would be, if I'm the school district, I would probably say that it's a safer bet for me to apply for reservation of funds because I have that extra cushion that was inadvertently built in when the original program regulations built in this reservation of funds option, which was a great option, and a lot of folks jumped on it, but it created this inequity between the two different types of projects, those that are ready to go and those that wanted to exercise the option of the reservation. So that's the main focus, really. Okay. Here's to bring that equity. The discussion about review, how good are cost estimates, those are all valid discussions. We have other programs that operate on cost estimates. The ERP program, for example, has the same flaws. We may underapportion if the bid climate, is unfavorable. So that's...
Yeah, and I think that, Masha, was great, because I think that's what we need to understand is what are we trying to get at here. So then the next discussion is based on the premise of what we're trying to solve. Does this language solve that? And if you don't agree and we have differences or want to see changes, then that's the suggestions that I want to hear from the IMP committee members to advise OPSC. If you disagree with the language here, doesn't resolve the issue, what language needs to be there to resolve the issue? So hands, anybody? Gary?
The only thing I just so what you're saying is you want all the cost estimates for career tech to be based on DSA plans. That's what you're saying.
That is the first
okay. That's right.
Because for group
that's where
A
you're going with this, and I think that's a pretty reasonable premise and pie in the sky guessing. So.
Robert?
Rob Pierce, Suburban Schools. Can you explain that to me one more time, Masha? So I got plans and specs, DSA approved, I'm ready to build, I come in under this program for funding, as opposed to a district that just does reservation of funds.
That first group of districts is potentially disadvantaged, yes, because they also run the same risks of being under apportioned. It's just we're working with a baked cost estimate versus a more premature one that has not been accompanied by plans and specs.
But the equity issue is still resolved at the end when savings is determined.
Well, actually, let me try and explain it because I think I get this. So if you have two districts submit at the same time, get stamped same, one kind of comes in, let's just say the district that wants to build the media center comes in a little earlier than the second district that comes in with the plans and specs and DSA approved, that has the $2 million cost, they get the $1 million as it moves through. The reservation of funds for the project that was in first, they get that $1 million reservation because they don't have DSA approved project specs. But when they finally come in, then that allocation gets readjusted after. So it then comes in, it's actually 1.8.
You know what? I think I may have confused folks with my example. The first project in my example would only come in for 1.8 million. I'm sorry.
Right.
That was my bad. I'm sorry. Let me correct my example. Both districts start planning on their own, at home. Nobody's talking to OPSC. District A thinks it's going to be 2 million, District B is going to 2 million, but these folks move forward and their final cost estimate comes only to 1.8. So we only apportion them half of 1.8.
Mm-hmm.
So we never give them that 100,000 to play with. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Needed to correct myself.
And then so that 1.8 is also verified by PVT?
Same guidelines, exactly. Same guidelines. PVT reviews projects under the same guidelines whether they come in as reservation of funds or regular apportionment ready to go, but the district that's ready to go is not going to get the extra cushion. I'm sorry.
So, I mean, in both scenarios, you're potentially taking away money that they're going to need to finish the project, and it's money that you otherwise would have had coming back to you anyhow with the final 5006. And I would say that the risk of getting the money a little later to the benefit of 800 kids that need a cafeteria or whatever it is a risk that we should take. In the scenario, this is the first time I heard that part of the intent is to keep districts from kind of scope creep to the point that you expend all the money. That's news to me, but that can work any number of ways to ensure that you don't declare savings. In the picture we're painting now would require you to actually eliminate scope during the course of construction because you simply just don't have enough money.
Okay, let's go Sean, and then Tom, and then Margie.
And I just want to speak to the point or to the question of whether or not this creates equity. I think maybe it creates some parity in a very specific situation. But if the bid climate were, not in our favor, then those people with reservations of funds are being harmed as compared to those that come in with DSA-approved drawings, because we're capped at the reservation amount. And so if bids go up, we're not getting any adjustment up to match what it's really going to cost us. So this does not create equity. It addresses a very specific situation.
Okay, Tom?
Okay. Madam Chair, members, Tom Duffy for Cashian. We wanted to go to Masha's example because it's and I think it leaks into the third item, but it's germane to the second as well as the third, that if we're saying that this is not an apportionment anymore, it's an apportionment. The allocation board is taking action to apportion. Under this program, that apportionment, Rob nailed it, that apportionment is treated differently than under other programs where there's an attempt to say you can't now, as you're further along in a project, decide to add more because you've had authority for that extra $200,000 or $100,000 that Masha was talking about. So we all know who build that when we begin to build, we're conservative because we want to make sure we can build the project, and we may add back in, whether it's furniture and equipment, whether it's something else in the building. There was a discussion earlier, and I think it was you one that were talking about alternates and prudent districts use them, additive or deductive. So how is this different? If this is an apportionment, how is it different that you could argue on that we want to tell you even before you're done that we want to take money back, or at some point in time tell you that you should have given us dollars back? I'm not understanding that. An apportionment is apportionment. We get to go and spend the money. And if through an audit something's discovered that we didn't put something in that you expected, like a classroom, then we agree that because that's pupil driven, you can take that back. So how is this different?
I think, and Masha mentioned this earlier, that we relate the apportionment to the actual amount of funds based on the plans and specs. If you don't have them coming in, it's a reservation, and that's, I think, what Section D, which is currently in effect, does right now. It sets aside the reservation for projects that don't have the plans. So that's in effect, and that's part of the reg now. We're just going a step further to try and capture whatever funds may not be eligible for the project sooner rather than later. If it's going to come back anyway, let's put it back into the program in front of the projects. That's kind of the whole premise.
Okay.
So it's kind of like doing the final audit before the final audit. But that's what it sounds like.
No, it's basically just taking a look at the plans and seeing what's eligible at that time.
If the project is building and its equipment, and I have estimated it to be that it's going to cost the $3 million, so I've got the max, and I've bid it, and maybe I got a good bid, and I've been careful about spending the F&E money, and I've still got some dollars left. Do I or do I not have authority to add into that project because I can with some additional equipment? Do I have the ability to do that like under the current program?
No.
And why would that be the case?
Right now, if we don't make this change, you would. If we make it, it would be no, because it would come back at the review of the plans.
Well, I kind of like what Rob said, that is this really not a good way to administer a program, because you may take money back and underfund his project and still underfund the next project because of the way this is constructed. So I'll conclude by saying we do not like that provision either, and I won't come up and talk about this under number 3 because I've already had my say. Thank you.
Margie and then Law.
So,
and then I'd like to go to lunch, and if need be, we can have. But it sounds like the premise of this is we don't like item 2, and we need to hear more and get suggestions in.
Well, I heard that the idea was to get money back sooner because you don't want to wait 5 years, using the difference of $1.8 million and $2 million as one of the scenarios. The first district would only get 1.8 because they had their plans and specs. The second district would get to hang on to $2 million and then give it back in 5 years. And so what the majority of this committee is suggesting that we do it at bid time, not 5 years, but 12 to 18 months from now, or 12 to 30 months from now, not 5 years. And I think that's a great middle ground. I do have concerns, though, about this conversation about scope creep, because I've got 7 CTE projects, 6 of which are all built or are under construction. And we are not creeping scope. In order for us to get a piece of equipment changed on a robotics engineering lab, we had to convene a panel of experts and get our CBE letter amended. So if I was to spend all $2 million, of which I was only entitled $1.8 million, OPSC would catch it in the audit and I'd give it back. Because you can't change equipment and you can't change scope after you have your DSA plans and specs, because then it won't meet the CTE criteria or standards for which we were giving the grant for. So it's we just tried to change out a piece of equipment, and it required an act of of Congress. So the only thing I would agree with, because one of my 7 projects did have a reduction in scope. We found out we couldn't build the new building we wanted to build because of fire lanes and fire hydrants and issues like that. So we ended up modernizing a building. And so there is a huge savings there. And we would love to give it back to you. We bid it, and we'd be happy to give it back to you now. But to say that as a reservation of funds that we'd have to give it back before I bid it is wrong, because I'd be short of money. And I just think that saying that giving it back at bid time is a great middle ground and a great solution. Thank you.
Lyle? Oh, wait, Masha? Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify as far as the new term scope creep, we did not introduce that. Simply just to identify that from what we hear, there are 2 reasons why project costs may increase at the end. There could be added scope, which is a totally separate discussion, and it's not part of this discussion, but there is that extra cushion that Project 2 would have against risk that you were talking about at the last IMP meeting, as far as unforeseen things that come up with the design, unforeseen things in the market, whatever risk there is. And so our proposal of additional 5% would give all projects, regardless of their maturity in the process, that same cushion against risk that we were talking about. So just wanted to clarify that I do not want to, I don't want, my statements misrepresented. Lyle?
Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified, and I just want to make it real clear that this change is not a simple change of here, it's over here now and it's over there, going to be over there. This is a major change in the whole philosophy of the program. Right now, yes, there's an apportionment that's subject to a 12-month rule, but that 12 months means you either get it or you don't. You get your project in, your plans in, you get your money, period. Now you're talking about it's going to have to go back to the State Allocation Board for some adjustment to the apportionment, and that adjustment can only be downward, even though if you'd had the plans and specs at the time of the initial filing, it might have been bigger. And I just think you're creating a lot of problems. So the answer to your question, how to resolve this, I would like to see a Ledge Council opinion, first of all, saying that the board has the authority to say either that this is a preliminary apportionment subject to adjustment, or that the board has the authority to adjust a full and final apportionment, because I don't think you have the authority to do either one. Thank you.
As we can see, item 2, probably, item 1, we're done. Item 2, we can probably bring back in further discussion at the IMP committee, but let's move on to item 3 after lunch. So see y'all at 1:30.